Chapter 1. Fearlessness and Overcoming Fear. One of the many adjectives that describe the Spartans and the elite forces is fearless. They are the very essence of brave and courageous men who are willing to die for their country. Of course, you are just an ordinary person, and dying for your country is not really a part of your responsibilities right now, but you can definitely learn a thing or two about being fearless from the Greek warriors and elite forces. These people have a lot to fear because their lives are always on the line, but they are not afraid of facing the enemies to complete their mission. It's not exactly about not being scared of ghosts or monsters. You are not a child anymore. After all, this is about conquering your fear of taking on challenges and responsibilities in life because you are afraid that you do not have the capability to succeed. This is also about conquering not only fears but other negativities that you may have in life that prevent you from succeeding. You probably sometimes think that the quote about fearing nothing other than fear itself is a little too much because there is a lot to fear in life when in fact, this is something that the Spartans and elite forces have to live up to. The Marines, Navy SEALs, SAS, SBS, SBS, and other special forces always face dangers. It is not just a quote for them, but something that they have to face on a regular basis. It is their job and their life. Of course, ordinary people like you and me do not face the same kind of life-threatening situations like these elite soldiers. But we can learn a thing or two from them when it comes to being fearless. Overcoming fear has a lot to do with self-discipline. Self-discipline is all about mind over matter, not giving in to impulses and urges that can prove detrimental to your life goals. Being fearless is the same way. It is also about practicing mind over matter because you have to overcome something. And in this case, your fear of whatever it is that scares you. Here are some lessons that you can learn from elite soldiers who eat dangerous missions for breakfast. Prepare and practice. The special forces and the ancient Spartans train really hard before they become full-fledged soldiers or warriors. The Spartans, for instance, started their preparation at a really young age. Most of their lives was spent training to become the very best Spartan warriors. And it paid off because their reputation as strong and powerful soldiers is still very much known up to this day. The special forces of today also undergo training that would make any Spartan proud. Training is equal to preparation and practice. And according to James Water, former commander of a SEAL platoon, the Navy SEALs spend 25% of their time on deployment and 75% goes to training, which includes preparation and practice. If you have prepared enough for what you are about to do, you will lose yourself in the moment and you will not have time to worry and be scared. One of the objectives of preparation and practice is to know and master what you are about to do. In the case of the elite soldiers, they undergo training to prepare their bodies, mind, and emotions for when they are deployed to accomplish special tasks or missions. They learn about their goal, the place where they are going to be deployed, their enemy, their plan of attack, their weapons, and other important details of their mission that can help them succeed. They learn everything they can learn about their mission so that when they are deployed, they will not feel scared because they already know what they are about to face. If you have a presentation and you are scared of public speaking, you have to make sure that you prepare beforehand by researching, writing down notes, practicing in front of the mirror, and knowing and understanding your topic by heart so that you will feel less scared while presenting. You will feel more confident explaining your topic and answering questions that your audience will raise. Overcoming fears about being confident. And to be confident, You have to master the task that you need to accomplish to reach your goal by preparing and practicing. Learn from the Joker. The Joker laughs at his enemies, or even when in a situation where ordinary people will feel scared. This is his way of handling his fears. You do not necessarily need to be the Joker, who is a little crazy, but you can learn from him when it comes to fear management. Laugh at something that scares you or something that you feel you cannot do. This makes your fear or doubts seem insignificant and silly. It also tells you that everything will be fine and things will work out in the end. This is also a technique that the Navy SEALs and Army Rangers do when they find themselves in a dangerous situation. And there is scientific basis for this. Research conducted by the Stanford University showed that people who made jokes after looking at disturbing pictures coped a lot better than people who did not about what they saw. If you feel scared about cutting back on all the things that you are used to having but don't really need, such as your daily dose of Starbucks coffee or your monthly shopping spree, you should just look at it as something funny and frivolous, which would make it easier for you to do them. If you feel afraid of going into the shower without hot water, you should make a joke about it or laugh at yourself for being scared of something so silly, and you will feel your fear go away. The world may be a scary place, but if you find humor in any situation, even the scary and difficult ones, you will go very far. Let it go. Soldiers who are in a dangerous situation are encouraged to talk to their peers while on deployment to help them find meaning in what they do. After deployment, when the soldiers return to their homes, they're encouraged to talk to experts or undergo therapy because it helps them make sense of what they have experienced while on deployment. These soldiers have seen and experienced a lot of traumatic things that will make any ordinary person be scarred for life, but talking about it at least diminishes the feeling of fear. You can talk to someone you trust, like a close friend or family, if you have fears that you would like to overcome. For example, if you are planning to quit smoking cigarettes, but you are scared of taking the leap because smoking has been a big part of your life since you were a teenager, then you can talk about it to someone close to you. Admitting your fear to someone and hearing yourself voicing it out loud is a great way to confront your fear because you are letting it out in the open. Tell someone about it and let it all go, and you will realize that sometimes fear is just all in your head. Take deep breaths. Some people show physical manifestations of fear. You will feel their heart beating faster, and you will see them sweating bullets. Some also feel their knees turning to jelly and their voice shaking when they start to speak. When you start to feel and see these physical signs of fear on yourself, just breathe slowly and deeply. You already know by now that elite soldiers use breathing techniques to calm their nerves. It also allows them to control the physical manifestations of fear. And when they feel that they are in control, they will feel more powerful and fearless. Navy SEAL trainer even said that breathing is like a software that helps you bend your hardware or your body. It may sound too nerdy, but this is in fact what breathing does to your body. It allows you to get a grip on yourself and continue doing what you need to do without showing signs that you are scared or nervous. Ignore the voice in your head. As discussed previously, fear is all in your head. It is just about mind over matter. If other people can do it, so can you. When you start to hear that negative voice in your head telling you that you cannot do it, make it stop by simply ignoring. You are probably wondering, why do we have this kind of inner voice that gives us feelings of fear and nervousness in times of stress? Why can't we have an inner voice that acts like a cheerleader instead, a voice that tells us that we can do it. Apparently, this is how our brains work. It simply gives us the worst-case scenarios when that's the last thing you need. Do you know what elite soldiers do when the negative self-talk starts inside their head? They ignore the voice. Or if you have an asshole inner voice that is really persistent, you might want to do something more drastic, such as mentally shouting over the negative thoughts and replacing them with positive thoughts. To do this, you need to focus on the positive aspects of the task or situation. If you are feeling nervous or scared about talking in front of a large group of people, you can simply remind yourself that this will improve your grades or give you a shot at being promoted. It takes self-discipline to do this because you have to exert willpower so that the negative self-talk will not prevail. Courage versus boldness. You need to know the difference between the two because they are sometimes used interchangeably when, in fact, they are not exactly the same. Let's understand more about these terms by looking at the two powerful ancient Greek cities, Athens and Sparta. We all know that between the two, the Spartans were better at warfare because of many reasons. They had extreme discipline, and their training was so effective that modern warfare trainings and techniques are patterned after the Spartans' Gauge system. So, what is it about the Spartans that the Athenians lacked? What made them far superior, and later on led to the defeat and decline of Athens? The answer is in the character trait that these ancient people possessed. The Spartans had Andrea, or courage, while the Athenians had Thrasitites, or boldness. Courage means bravery, and it involves manliness. It is one characteristic of a mature man. Courage and manliness are intertwined. One can achieve courage when one has achieved maturity. On the other hand, boldness is seen more as a boyish trait. Bold man is highly ambitious, brazen, and proud, whereas a brave or courageous man is calm, steady, and God-fearing. Between the two, who do you think is more reliable? The brave man or the bold man? Obviously, you would want someone courageous to be on your side during combat or in dire situations, because you can definitely rely on them. Or better yet, be the courageous man that every man should strive to be. Boldness is impulsive and sometimes even reckless. It does not involve thinking and analyzing of situations and facts. Of course, this trait can be beneficial, too, when in the context of seizing a great opportunity that knocks on your door only once in a lifetime. In this case, boldness can be used, but it should still be coupled with courage and self-discipline all throughout. And a man should always strive to be courageous than bold. Courage is enduring and steady. It can endure suffering for a longer period of time. It is also humble and has its feet always planted firmly on the ground. It is why courage is more pleasing to heaven. Boldness, on the other hand, is impatient and fickle. It cannot endure sufferings, especially on long periods of time, and the prize or victory should be instant, otherwise boldness will die. This is why courage involves self-discipline, because it does not give in to impulse, but rather it delays gratification for a much better reward. Because of boldness is impatient, its main weakness is time. It cannot endure and is easily perishable. The Athenians were known for their surprise attacks and quick battles that had a decisive result. The Spartans, on the other hand, were known for their endurance and strength in prolonged battles. For the Athenians, when victory did not come easily, they lose heart and hope and they give up. This quality and mindset, which works excellently with self-discipline, are what made the Spartans more superior than the Athenians. Today, you see a lot of people who are more bold and courageous. Sure, they get excited about the idea of tackling a new task or starting a new habit, but this excitement and the burning passion of doing something new only lasts for a short time. The first few days is fun and exciting. They write down their tasks and even track their activities. But as time goes by, when the novelty of the idea wears off and when setbacks arrive, the feeling of excitement slowly fades. It will plateau, then slowly go to S downward spiral. It becomes boring, and they realize that it involves a lot of hard work that they did not anticipate. As days go by, they start working less and less on the task. Before, they did it every day. After a couple of months, they just did it a few times a week, and then whenever they feel like doing it, then at last they just start to completely ignore it. These people will come up with excuses. They are working on other stuff. They are too busy. They do not feel good anymore working on that task. A lot of excuses. They will even go as far as telling themselves that this task is the wrong task for them in the first place, because doing it feels so difficult. And shouldn't it be more fun? Especially since they've been doing it for quite some time now? They make themselves believe that the task is wrong for them, when in fact it is their work ethic that is the problem. They do not have the self-discipline and courage to continue what they have started. If you have the mindset of the Athenians, who did not finish what they started, and who just leave things when the going gets tough, you should change your ways, because this will only lead to your downfall, like what happened to the Athenians. It will become a cycle that is more difficult to get out of. Be more like the Spartans, who will start the task and make sure that they see it through till the end. Boldness can help you start things, but only courage can make you finish. So, what do you need to do to overcome fear and gain self-confidence to do things? Use your fear to your advantage. It may sound impossible to do, but this is what most military men do. If they look at fear as something they need to evade and escape from, they will find themselves in even worse situations, because it is something that you cannot escape from. Like what was mentioned earlier, fear is real, and the thing that you are afraid of is real. Whether it is a major job interview, a large credit card bill, or a big life decision that you have to make. It exists, and you have to face it sooner or later. Remember the movie Confessions of a Shopaholic? The lead actress always kept her credit card bills in her drawer, unopened. She did not want to look at them, as if her debts would go away if she ignored them. Eventually, she realized that she has to be an adult and face her problems by going to the bank and talking to them. This is how you should handle fear. Face it head on.
And how are you going to use it to your advantage?
You might ask. You are probably obsessing over your problem already. So use the information and scenarios that you have built up in your head in coming up with a solution to your fear. Look at it in a positive light. For example, if you are afraid to speak in public because you know for a fact that you will be speaking in front of hundreds of people, you can use this information when you visualize yourself speaking in public. Tell yourself, so there will be hundreds of people. How will I address them and make them feel like I'm talking to each one of them? Eye contact is possible only for the ones in front, but I will still try to look at the back, or maybe ask questions addressed to the back of the room. You can use the details that you are already obsessing about, but in a positive way. Chapter 2. Plasticity in All Forms. In 1972, scientists from Cambridge University ran an unpleasant and borderline cruel experiment on kittens. For 5 months, Colin Blakemore and Graham Cooper raised kittens in closed, off environments where they could only see horizontal or vertical lines. They were placed in cylindrical containers with either horizontal or vertical lines on the walls, never both. When caretakers took them out to feed or handle the kittens, they wore clothing that was covered in either horizontal or vertical lines. For all intents and purposes, these two groups of kittens experienced different versions of reality. After being shut into those environments for 5 months, researchers took them out to see how they'd fare in a world with both horizontal and vertical orientation. Would their eyes have adapted to their version of reality? Was there going to be any difference at all? The kittens, it turned out, couldn't recognize objects or patterns of the kind that they weren't exposed to in their sealed, off environment. The kittens raised in the horizontal chambers could not see vertically aligned objects. They kept bumping into chair legs and weren't responsive when researchers thrust a finger toward them in a vertical direction. Meanwhile, the vertical cats couldn't find an appropriate place to lie down and take a nap, since they had no ability to recognize horizontal planes. This surely resulted in some YouTube-worthy videos of kittens being clumsy. Some of the kittens in the experiment successfully rehabilitated in a few weeks, but many never did. Their primary visual cortexes had been engineered so strongly in one angle that they were effectively blind to whatever lines they weren't exposed to during those 5 months. This is an example of neuroplasticity that affects the very perception of reality. And then there's the case of taxi drivers and bus drivers in London. Researchers from the University of London studied and compared their brain structures in 2000 and discovered something notable. The taxi drivers had measurably larger hippocampi than the bus drivers. Why might this be? The theory behind their findings was that taxi drivers had to essentially memorize the entire road map of London. They needed to know the best shortcuts and alternate courses to take, and that required in-depth knowledge about every street and alley in town. It's something that could take months or even years. The bus drivers, on the other hand, only had to drive a couple of pre-planned routes every day with little or no variation. They only needed to memorize a few turns and perhaps not even the street names. They could do it through visual memory alone, recognizing buildings or landmarks. However many people are on the bus makes no difference to the bus driver, as they already know the path and endpoint. However, being a taxi driver is somewhat like playing Russian roulette. You never know what you're going to get or how to get there. Okay, maybe that's more Forrest Gump than Russian roulette. Recall that the hippocampus is directly linked to memory processing. Clearly, the taxi drivers memorized more and interacted with their memories more on a daily basis, and thus the hippocampi were larger. Now, here is an example of neuroplasticity that gets us closer to what we're looking for. But don't forget about the Moken children. They're a nomadic tribe who occupy a group of tropical islands in Thailand. These sea gypsies spend the large majority of their lives on boats in the middle of the sea. They also have the uncanny ability to see extremely well underwater, even at substantial depths, handy when they need to catch fish on a daily basis. The Moken can do this because they've taught themselves how to regulate the shapes of the lenses and pupils of their eyes, as dolphins and seals do. They were able to constrict those individual eye parts by as much as 22% when underwater. One might think that trait is just part of the genetic code of the Moken, who have developed it, just as Charles Darwin's finches developed different characteristics as a result of adaptation to different environments. But that's because we assume our pupils and lenses just adjust themselves and that it's an innate act that we can't control. This would be proven wrong. Swedish researcher tried to train a group of European children how to manipulate their eyes the way the Moken did. And after just 11 sessions in 1 month, they were able to see underwater just as well as the Moken. This is an instance of neuroplasticity as it relates to developing the ability to control your body and kinesthetics. While we're at it, let's talk about musicians. Researchers found that the brains of professional musicians have a higher volume of gray matter in portions of their brains responsible for auditory processing and motor functions, and of course related to musical abilities. Amateur musicians had slightly less gray matter, and non-musicians had least of all. For neurological purposes, the greater the amount of gray matter in a certain area, the more developed and robust the underlying ability is. And just like with the London taxi drivers, repetitive usage and exposure cause specific neuroplasticity. However, such neuroplasticity is a double-edged sword for musicians. Among musicians who use 2 fingers simultaneously to play an instrument, such as a rock bassist, their brains had mapped those 2 fingers together so that the musician couldn't move one without moving the other, a phenomenon called focal dystonia. Remember the homunculus? Imagine that it's 2 fingers merged into one larger section. Their brains adapted in such a way that they had to undo that condition through specialized training to play other instruments effectively. This certainly brings new meaning to why budding musicians are always chided to practice perfect or practice slowly, because the practice will become embedded in the brain, for better or worse. And there are the Russians and linguistic relativity. Long-standing theory called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis maintains that our patterns and systems of thought derive heavily from the language we use. One example of this theory in action is how Russian language speakers define colors in comparison to other tongues. Whereas Westerners might refer to different shades of blue as light and dark blue, Russians have 2 completely different words to distinguish between the two, Sinai and Goluboy. That makes Russians slightly faster in discerning the 2 colors, which they perceive as having completely different names than other dialects that only see them as alternate shades of the same color. This demonstrates neuroplasticity as a consequence of simple linguistic changes. Finally, there's the elderly. The common belief is that the brain deteriorates as people age. But recent research indicates that's not necessarily the case. In fact, it's been found that the brain never ceases making new learning cells and readjusting its neural connections. Previously, it was believed that the brains of children and young adults conducted neuroplasticity more regularly and that the process slowed down considerably as people got older. However, research has found that old people's brains are just as malleable as those of younger folks, just in a different way. Old people's brains develop new circuits and different connections to their frontal lobes, which in turn open up new understandings and perceptions that only the rare young adult can develop. There is, it turns out, a biological basis for the notion of older people being wiser. What do all these examples prove? Neuroplasticity isn't just an unmanageable, innate consequence of what you're exposed to. It can be intentionally shaped through several factors like the environment, repeated activities, and linguistics. And it can, therefore, be trained. You may not want to possess a map of London in your head, but you can use the same process to learn faster, develop better habits, grow self-discipline, and simply accomplish what you put your mind to. Neuroplasticity is the vehicle that allows those things. It simply allows you to translate intention directly to action instead of hoping for the best. What is neuroplasticity? The above accounts show that neuroplasticity is no joke. Neuroplasticity is how our brain adapts in ways that reflect our experiences and actions. Oh, not necessarily our intentions. And we can channel this to improve our lives. But first, we should distinguish between the two types of neuroplasticity, structural and functional. Structural neuroplasticity concerns the neuronal connections of the brain and the strength of the neural network. Structural neuroplasticity takes place by literally changing the brain structure to increase the efficacy of a particular set of functions or actions. It involves building or strengthening the synaptic connections between neurons that you need or want the most and scaling back or removing the ones you don't. Our neural networks change according to how regularly we employ them. If we don't require certain neural pathways in our regular lives, they're not going to stick around. In plain English, we create neuroplasticity through repetitive actions and thoughts that eventually become habits, and in doing so we reinforce and improve the function of these neural pathways. Repeated behaviors create new patterns of thought and habits. Little by little, neuroplasticity occurs and starts to wear a groove like a Zen garden or sandbox that gets raked repeatedly so that the grooves become deeper and deeper and deeper over time until they are finally unconscious and instinctual. The brain is always ready to begin this process because ultimately these grooves save the brain energy and allow it to do what it wants, habituate and conserve energy. The London taxi drivers are an illustrative example of how structural neuroplasticity works. They've spent years cultivating intricate knowledge of the entire grid of London streets. The grooves have been worn deeply. The more they've practiced that mental training, the more automatic and quickly their decisions about routes and shortcuts become. The neural connections regarding directions and locations are incredibly strong and resilient, and it becomes easy to jump from one thought to the next. It's not just because they have quick reflexes or physical stamina. It's because their brains have been conditioned through experience and practice over a long and hopefully profitable period of time. When one thought is sparked, the associated thoughts that come after it fire more quickly and reliably the more we train it. Think of it as the taxi driver being able to recall one street and then suddenly being able to summon a mental picture of the entire neighborhood. Structural neuroplasticity is really what underlies most of the changes we see in the ones we want. If you want to break a bad habit of smoking, it requires repetition of the behavior you want, not smoking, or rather satisfying your urges in another way, such as chewing gum, so that particular groove becomes worn and the action of not smoking becomes easy and natural. Learning is nothing but creating and strengthening connections between independent pieces of information. Overcoming fears requires consciously digging the groove of courage and acknowledging that you will be fine no matter what happens. Discipline is about creating the groove of delayed gratification and comfort with discomfort. Accordingly, structural neuroplasticity is what this book focuses on. If you have a thought, it causes a neural change. If you keep having the same thought, it becomes a positive feedback loop that reinforces and cements the change. In this way, your past does not determine your future. What determines it is only what you think in this very moment and what you think in the future. All of your thoughts, actions, and behaviors are being recorded somewhere, and every day we have the choice of how we want to program our brains. Functional neuroplasticity is much less common, as it involves the brain's ability to improve or retain functionality in cases such as when the brain is damaged. This involves more dramatic change of the cortical remapping variety. Consider the amputees with phantom limbs. Their neural pathways were creating sensations that didn't correspond to anything in the real world. they still felt the presence of something that wasn't there. That's because an area of the brain was starting to take over another area's functioning. Remember that the homunculus is a shining example of how functional neuroplasticity works. A study showed that parts of the brain that regulate the face are perilously close to the parts that affect the hand. Over time, for amputees, the functionality of those unused brain structures was slowly subsumed by its neighbors. So, while a natural curiosity, functional neuroplasticity is not likely something we can create without extreme sensory deprivation or unfortunate circumstances. The process of neuroplasticity. The etymology of neuroplasticity is simple. The prefix neuro refers to nerves or nerve cells, and plasticity refers to a certain object's capability of being molded or changed. Dr. Michael Merzenich defined neuroplasticity as the brain's ability to change its anatomical, neurochemical, and functional performance status across the lifespan. Any given person's brain is different because their neuroplasticity has been entirely unique. Your thoughts, activities, behaviors, beliefs, and experiences all have direct impact on the shaping of your brain. Because nobody besides you has ever been through what you've been through. That means your brain's been molded by a completely singular series of patterns nobody else can ever quite duplicate, which means, in turn, that your brain is the only one of its kind. Neuroplasticity happens from the moment one is born. Newborn baby's brain is a total blank slate, entirely uninformed, but it's structured to start taking input right away. Its cerebral cortex is ready to build its complex neural pathways. The first few years of a child's life are the time when its brain development is the fastest, but not necessarily because the young brain is more malleable. Information is being constantly created and analyzed, and it's coming in fast. Again, this is primarily structural neuroplasticity in creating synaptic connections and strengthening existing ones. As the child grows into an adolescent, some parts of the massive influx in the brain that's happened to them become unnecessary to retain. That's when the brain starts going through something called synaptic pruning. It gets rid of the synapses that we haven't been using and keeps the ones that we have used most often. By the time a child reaches the age of 10, he or she has already dumped half of all the synapses they had at the age of 2. This is why we rarely remember anything from the first 2 years of our lives. When we become adults, our brain development cools off from the rapid-fire pace it experienced as kids. As we advance in age, we do lose brain cells and certain neural connections in the interest of efficiency and laziness. We begin to lose brain cells at a higher rate than we form new ones. And this is what causes many elderly people to suffer mental decline. However, what we don't lose as we get older is the brain's ability to rewire itself. We might drop a couple of brain cells, well, more than just a couple, but we never lose the ability to alter and strengthen our neural pathways. We can change how our synapses fire and the connections that we build. Learning and having new experiences are the primary ways we restructure our neural pathways. Taking on new skills or knowledge directly affects the function and organization of our synapses, and that can happen at any time. It's something we actually can control, and we actually should, because neuroplasticity doesn't always have a positive result. Brain power is a lot like muscle power in that if you don't use it, you lose it. If one doesn't use a certain neural connection regularly, it dies off. Certain parts of the brain even decrease in size if they're not regularly employed. That's not terrible in and of itself. A concert pianist isn't going to use all the same brain functions that a lumberjack does, so they're just not going to need them. But on the other hand, by not developing and thereby losing synaptic exchanges, we could be limiting our own potential. There are also certain neural connections that aren't positive at all. Bad physical habits, substance abuse or addiction, and negative self-talk can also become encoded and entrenched in neural pathways. The brain's reward system doesn't always distinguish between helpful pleasures and harmful ones. The hippocampus remembers and encodes the pleasure one might get from the taste of cheese puffs, driving 100 miles an hour, or the high of a drug just the same as it processes the happiness of getting a diploma or falling in love. All the amygdala knows is that it feels great, and it develops a conditioned response. Its neural pathways are set, and not for the best. Scientists have also found a difference between the neural pathways of domesticated and wild animals, namely, that domestication can have adverse effects on neuroplasticity. The more civilized a being becomes, the smaller their brain gets. For example, a domesticated dog has a smaller brain than its relative, a wild coyote. Anthropologists have discovered this disparity in the process of human history as well. But believe it or not, the brains of humans from 10,000, 20,000 years ago were physically bigger than the ones we have now. That's the type of neural engagement that comes with a constant hunt for food and shelter and rarely having a moment for leisure or relaxation. Contrast that to today's preferred leisure activities, most of which include sitting still for extended periods of time. Although it's a bit late for us to do anything about that, it does lend some credence to the idea that taking occasional chances and chasing unfamiliar experiences is more mentally beneficial than staying within our safe, comfortable, unchallenging existences. The less challenge and unfamiliarity, the less our brains have to work and adapt, and this is a negative consequence of our easier, modern lifestyles. Inducing the neuroplasticity we want is inherently tough and uncomfortable, precisely because it involves unfamiliarity and wearing a new groove where none existed before. It's inevitable that our brains will change and develop throughout our lives. But again, it's something we can control. It forces us to become a lifelong learner. The more we engage and expose our brains to new challenges, the more we actually physically reshape the structure of our neuronal networks. Studies have shown, for example, that taking art lessons have a direct impact on our fluid intelligence, attention span, and even overall IQ. Making music has been linked to better memory, increased learning ability, and greater attention span as well. The debate of neuroplasticity. Scientists didn't always agree that the brain was capable of changing itself. Up until fairly recently, the general belief was that the brain only grew in infancy and childhood, and that by the time one hits early adulthood, the brain is done growing and its structure was set in stone. Researchers believe that neurogenesis, the formation of new neurons, ended shortly after birth. This belief persisted in ancient times because the brain was considered fairly fixed and was believed to decrease in pure ability the older one got. Later minds believed that the inability of certain brains to recover from damage proved it was essentially finite. In that context, they weren't able to observe how the brain functioned or behaved on a microscopic level, which of course changed once advanced technology became available. And thus they had no reason to think differently. But even during those pre-modern times, there were outliers who thought there was more to brain function that wasn't quite being picked up. In 1980, psychologist William James wrote in his book The Principles of Psychology that he observed an extraordinary degree of plasticity in organic matter, especially nervous tissue, the fundamental building block of neurons. Researcher Carl Lashley observed evidence of brain transformation in his study of rhesus monkeys. And just before brain science took a great leap forward in the 1960s, doctors noticed that certain older stroke victims could regain at least a little of their brain functionality. He might not have pictured it to be as complex as the cortical remapping we've discussed, but this spurred him to suppose that neuroplasticity, or some form of neural regeneration, was possible. It wasn't until Dr. Michael Merzenich ran experiments in the early 7.0s that we obtained confirmation that the brain can change itself. Ironically, the goal of Merzenich's project was to prove the opposite, that the brain, for all intents and purposes, is set in stone, and once a part of it is damaged, what it once knew can't be relearned. Instead, Merzenich discovered that the entire brain is essentially one fluid learning organ that functioned as a whole, that if a skill is lost through damage to a particular part of the brain, other parts can potentially learn it as well. This gets us back to the homunculus, the little man that best describes the process of cortical remapping. Merzenich found that if, say, the cortical map of the hand was blocked from sensory input and therefore inoperative, it could be reanimated through the stimulation of other cortical maps close to the hand on the homunculus. For example, the forearm or even the eye. It was a clear indication that the brain was capable of adapting in ways that were real and tangible. Primary aspects of neuroplasticity. Merzenich's discovery of neuroplasticity obviously merited more research into the topic. It was a monumental discovery that could help answer questions not only about recovery and healthcare, but in peak mental performance and boosting the brain power that we are born with. In the years since his findings on neuroplasticity, the scientific community has made more determinations about the process that furthered our understanding of it. Brain plasticity varies according to age. Although neuroplasticity is a lifelong process, younger brains are more apt to grow and develop systems of organization. Therefore, the brains of young ones are more sensitive and receptive to certain stimuli than those of older people. You've probably heard that it's nearly impossible to become fluent like a native in a language if you learn it as an adult. While not a hard rule, there is some scientific grounding for this claim. It involves more than just neural processes. Nerve cells don't operate alone when it comes to neuroplasticity. They do have a support staff. In particular, glial cells help to support and insulate neurons. Vascular cells, which carry nutrients throughout the body, are also important in the process, and might explain why good nutrition is especially important in neuroplasticity, along with everything else. Everything about the structure changes. Brain plasticity happens in one of two ways. The preferred manner, of course, is through learning, experience, and memory, all of which contribute to shaping and defining the neural passageways. But it can also happen through damage to the brain, such as when it suffers through a stroke. Even then, damage from a stroke can be repaired. As mentioned, this is the difference between structural and functional neuroplasticity. Environment is important in brain plasticity. Primary conduit of neuroplasticity is what we experience, which naturally comes from our immediate surroundings and what we go through day to day. Genetics may play a role as well, but at this point, we know that neuroplasticity is a direct result of what the brain is exposed to over a period of time. If you are in an environment that forces a certain set of actions, thoughts, behaviors, or habits, then you're left with no choice but to change and adapt. We'll talk more about this soon, as this is known as using an enriched environment. And that's pretty much what it sounds like. A set of surroundings that make up a supportive and thoughtful place for quality mental and physical stimulation. What comprises an enriched environment is obviously different for everyone, but it's shown to stimulate production of new brain cells, especially in the parts of the brain that regulate mood and memory. Whether it's a place where one can more effectively learn without too much anxiety or simply get some quality sleep to create and prune synaptic connections. And there's a lot of truth to the notion that being in the right environment is key, even in neuroplasticity. Brain plasticity isn't always good. As I mentioned earlier, certain kinds of neuroplasticity, those that arise from drug use, bad habits, and negative self-talk, isn't what we'd call the good kind. Phobias, anxiety, and fear are genetic and instinctual from years of evolution, but many are learned through repetition, just like the multiplication tables or the capitals of the countries of the world. From synaptic pruning to neurogenesis, we now understand that the brain doesn't become a stationary object after a certain point in life. Synaptic pruning doesn't just whittle our brains down to nothing after a while. The brain actually continues to manufacture new brain cells and new neural passageways. Thanks to extensive research in the area, we also now know that there are things we can do to stimulate increased production and improvement of brain cells, which we call neurogenesis. The brain starts making new cells when we're still in the womb. The fetal brain eventually creates almost 1 trillion new neurons in the 9 months between conception and birth. That number is eventually reduced through synaptic pruning to about 100 billion, which is about the number that we maintain for the rest of our lives. Pruning and modification, as we've discussed, comes through experience determining which neural pathways we use and which we don't. Once we're born, the production of new brain cells slows down, and the production remains definitely in only 2 parts of the brain. One is the hippocampus, our main source of learning and memory. The other is the subventricular zone, which produces more neural cells than any other region in the brain for eventual distribution to the forebrain. Other studies have suggested, not conclusively, that the subventricular zone also sends brain cells to the olfactory bulb, which handles our processing of new smells. But then again, the sense of smell is strongly related to memory, and it is common for smells to conjure up far away and long ago situations and people. Almost any activity that engages the mind has been shown to stimulate the production of brain cells, including mental activities like psychotherapy, performing stimulating tasks, learning, and even just reflecting on our thoughts, especially the positive ones. But it can also be generated through physical activities like exercise. Additionally, certain medications have been shown to stimulate neurogenesis. In both neural pathway generation and synaptic pruning, which actually doesn't stop until we're well into our 20s, our brain creates new connections through the growth of dendrites and axons, especially during sleep. The production of new pathways and the deletion of unused ones is informed by our personal experiences and what we think, do, or say. Creation of new connections is impacted by almost anything that interacts with the brain. Words, thoughts, memories, meditation, heightened attention, and especially new learning. The new cells that form in the hippocampus are especially linked to learning. They're much more likely to respond to brand new information than older neurons, are more moldable, and are more capable of learning and memorizing newly introduced complicated concepts. The formation of new neural connections, especially important to consider since we never stop making new ones even after brain cell production slows down, is particularly responsive to mindful activities. There are several factors that work against neuroplasticity. Lack of sleep is one of the most damaging, and high levels of stress and gastrointestinal disorders have also been shown to have a negative impact. And despite the fact that our neural activity doesn't stop as we get older, the stimulation of new brain cells does decrease with age. That's really what causes seniors to degrade, not necessarily a high level of synaptic pruning. There is some level of control we can exert over those factors, except getting older, so monitoring them and their effects on our lives is a key step in directing our brain plasticity. At this point, you understand the brain and just what it takes to effect change upon it. The neural growth you desire is within your grasp, as are the benefits that come with it. When you view your mental performance as a result of the number of neuronal connections you cultivate, or the greater number of dendrites you recruit on a daily basis, it suddenly becomes very clear how to build a better brain. Chapter 3. How to build massive momentum. Have you ever been completely and fully dedicated to a goal?
Have you ever gotten so lost in your work that you lost track of time?
Unaware of the outside world, focused only on your progress and what's happening here and now? Think about it. It probably happened to you while you were doing something you're passionate about. If you answered yes to any of these questions, chances are you've experienced momentum. This state is one of the keys to happiness at work and in your personal life, and one of its side benefits is that it not only reduces stress, but increases productivity by leaps and bounds. It's a state of mind that roots us entirely in the present moment and helps us be more creative, productive, and happy. In this chapter, we'll explain in detail how to develop momentum, why it's essential, and how to achieve it to increase productivity and happiness toward your goals. Building momentum in your life is about improving the things that drive you forward and decreasing the things that hold you back. It sounds like a no-brainer, but I know, just like you, that living the life we desire isn't always easy. We have habits and repeated cycles to overcome, but by building momentum, we can break through them and move into the life we want. Momentum, by its nature, takes an initial push to get the ball rolling. Here are 12 tips to jumpstart the speed in your life. Do one small task every day. We gain a fundamental psychological advantage when we create and establish small steps to take every day. First, we set a goal that is not scary but achievable in an easy way. This keeps us calm instead of raising negative thoughts and risking blocking everything. Imagine an untrained person who decides to run a marathon. As soon as he thinks about this goal, he becomes paralyzed and thinks, I have to run 42.195 km, not even for all the gold in the world. But if instead our goal was divided into incremental steps and intermediate tests, the same would be feasible and therefore would not trigger any alarm. Breaking tasks into small, repetitive actions is the secret to achieving ambitious goals. Take on a monthly challenge. The 30-day challenges are among my favorite methods of personal development and improvement. They are based on a straightforward concept. It takes 21 days for an activity to become a habit. Do the challenges work? It sometimes depends on permanently instilling a habit, especially if it is distant from our current conception. It takes longer. Still, despite this, a 30-day challenge can be beneficial to open your mind. Try new activities, overcome your limits, and understand how far you can go. L. Know yourself better. Train self-discipline. L. Prove to yourself that you can be consistent. Get out of your comfort zone. The first time I approached 30-day challenges was with fitness goals. We're all familiar with squat challenges, running challenges, and so on. It wasn't until later that I discovered that the model could easily be applied to many other areas, and the world opened up to me. Usually track the progress of challenges in my bullet journal, which helps keep motivation high and reinforces consistency. If your goal is to establish a new habit rather than to test yourself in a shorter time frame, I recommend 5-day challenges. Shorter period will allow us to measure ourselves nimbly and in smaller tasks without prolonging them for a month. Take action in the face of fear. Any people ask me, I'm stuck in fear. How can I overcome this? I'm afraid I'll never find the perfect partner or reach my dream goal. The first thing to remember is that we all have fears. What differentiates people who always seem to be able to overcome fears from those who are paralyzed by fear is not how afraid we are, but how much we know about that fear and how we choose to respond to it. You see, most of our concerns stem from a protective mechanism triggered when we are challenged to reduce any possible risk of failings or falling. Fear tries to keep you safe, but it does so by shifting your focus to the negative aspects of change and urging you to avoid taking risks. Of course, there are certain risks that we should avoid, but when this protective mechanism prevents you from taking the actions necessary to live the life you want and realize your plans, it's time to learn how to overcome fear, or rather, how to act despite fear. This is the only way to get closer to your dreams, and there are no shortcuts. In all likelihood, that unattainable goal you set will be less terrible than you thought. Suppose you believe fear is one of your giant demons. One of the leading causes of procrastination is the lack of the right incentive to begin a particular task. Newton's first principle of dynamics is as follows: everybody perseveres in its state of stillness or uniform rectilinear motion unless it is forced to change that state by forces applied to it. If you tend to procrastinate, you are like an object in its state of stillness. When you start working on a project, you become a moving object, even if it's just getting started. As we said earlier, to stop procrastinating, all you need to do is start. The impetus that leads you to start is like the force that guides the object in a state of stillness to change its shape. Great way to put this principle into practice is to start with a small part of the task you need to tackle. This momentum will give you the impetus to keep working on your project. If you have to do a task that you tend to put off often and for a long time, put it as your first task the next day. Starting without distractions in the usual routine will allow you to stop overthinking and take action. Getting started will gratify you enough to keep going. Control your distractions.
How many times did you check your phone today?
How many emails did you answer during a business meeting? Digital distraction is one of the greatest enemies of productivity because it interferes with concentration and continuity at work. Entrepreneurs, professionals, and managers all suffer from a distraction syndrome that leads to not being focused on the required task. The distraction involves a significant expenditure of energy in resuming what you do after each interruption. Productivity suffers, and you feel like you haven't accomplished anything despite being exhausted at the end of the workday. Distractions are challenging to overcome, but not impossible. After you become aware of the habit, some changes in behavior will help detox with great benefit to your productivity. Commit to a 30-minute morning routine. Creating an effective 30-minute morning routine can help you develop a great frame of mind to start your day. You can do many things in the morning to improve mental flexibility and alertness. If you're not a morning person or like to keep hitting the snooze button on your alarm clock, we have just the thing for you. Increasingly convinced that how we spend the early morning hours can influence the rest of our day, especially when developing a morning routine. During this time of day, our minds are fresh and clear of the challenges that life has in store for us, and therefore open and able to improve our entire day dramatically. We can use this time to work on a project that has been in the drawer for a long time, spend time with family, learn to focus through mindfulness, or learn to enjoy a good cup of coffee. People who get up early tend to anticipate problems and do their best to minimize them, which helps them get more done in their studies and business opportunities. In fact, by getting up early, you can get ready for the day rather than chasing all the tasks right away. Blocking your action task. Do you ever get to the end of the day dead tired but feeling like you didn't get the day organized? It sounds crazy, I know. Yet that's what happens when you waste precious energy because of disorganization, mainly due to poor time management. Until recently, this happened to me a lot. Couldn't focus on one thing. I filled my schedule with tasks I struggled to accomplish. Each job took me longer than it should have, and I constantly felt I needed to catch up on everything. This is a steady building of frustration, nervousness, and dissatisfaction in all aspects of my life. At some point, I realized I couldn't keep this up, and I had to find a way to organize my day better if I wanted to get results. One strategy that has helped me manage my day is setting times to work without interruptions. Blocks can be 15, 30, 45, or 90 minutes long. You decide based on your pace and needs. No distractions of any kind are allowed during these sessions. The reason is straightforward. If you keep interrupting what you're doing, you'll get nowhere and feel exhausted anyway. Don't let others dictate your time. You decide how to use it. Focus. Only one priority task per day, although not of the utmost importance. We all have several things to manage that still need to be completed. And I'm not just talking about work stuff, but also activities that involve our free time. Key aspect of being more productive is focusing on a specific task. Plan the tasks according to the closest deadline or delivery date and consider the most important ones to complete. For example, if you have a project due in a short period, this will probably be your highest priority task for the next few days. Similarly, studying a subject will likely be at the top of your to-do list if you have a university exam in a week or two. Multitasking is best left to computers, whereas humans are most efficient when focusing on one thing at a time. If you think about it, the meaning of planning your work by dedicating a certain amount of time to each thing is to put in sequence the things you have to do to tackle them one at a time. Review your goals twice a day. The world is divided into two categories. People who dream and think about their future but struggle to get there and create it, and those who instead have a concrete idea of where they want to go. Step by step, manage your tasks in a way that will allow you to achieve your goals. With that in mind, I want to share a technique that has helped me tremendously. The technique involves imagining yourself feeling the emotions you expect to feel once you reach your goal, experiencing them with intensity at least twice a day. I suggest morning and evening. You can do this technique by associating it to the same criteria with which you practice meditation, so a quiet place, with eyes closed, relaxed, and start to evoke those images of you once the goal is reached, at least twice a day. This is an exercise of training the brain, and our emotional capacity will become more and more effective at producing that high-definition film. One day, it will be that very film that gives you the driving energy because you say, "Damn, it's there, I feel it, I live that situation, I feel it inside me, and as I can reproduce it inside me, I will be able to create it in reality." Get one small win per day. Two main factors motivate human beings: decreased pain and increased pain. The more something gives you joy, the more your brain will want it. The more a thing causes you pain, the less you will be inclined to do it. Would you prefer to do something you enjoy or something you don't want? The answer seems obvious. However, how can you do the things that, at first glance, you don't like? Simple, by making them enjoyable. At the beginning of each week, define a prize, which you can collect only once you have completed all your tasks for that day. This can be an activity you'd like to do that you no longer allow yourself to do, or something you've always wanted to do but didn't feel you deserved. Did you accomplish all the tasks you defined for today? Great. Treat yourself to your reward. Isn't it nice to be able to enjoy life a little? This will keep you motivated to accomplish more in the weeks to come. Go the extra mile. There are times when moving forward seems impossible, when we're confident we've scraped the bottom of our reserves. But it's precisely in these moments that we should remember the 40% rule. This is a straightforward tool, but I hope to help you rethink your limitations. Newt Gingrich, an American politician, said, "Perseverance is the hard work you do after all the hard work you've already done." It's a phrase that captures the true essence of perseverance and determination. The 40% rule is applied by the famous Navy SEALs, U.S. Navy Special Forces, known for the rather demanding physical training that takes them to the limits of their capabilities. According to these soldiers, we can endure much more than we think and go beyond what we set out to do. According to them, when our mind says, "Enough," we have only reached 40% of our potential. Therefore, when we are about to throw in the towel, we can continue and strive 60% harder. The 40% rule is a straightforward tool that helps us reevaluate our limits and allows us to change our perspective. It teaches us that if we want to push our boundaries, we need to take a step further and show our brain that this barrier is just a figment of our imagination. Over the next few days, you'll feel like giving up and trading your goals for some cheap distraction on at least one occasion. However, when one of those occasions arises, I'd like you to remember the 40% rule. But most of all, I'd like you to peek beyond what you think your limits are today instead of giving up on the first few difficulties. Just a peek, small step over the fence, but nothing more. Take massive action one day a week. The search for one's vocation is a process that is sometimes long and full of contingency. Goals, on the other hand, are different. If work is a drive of the soul, you choose plans that may be short-term. You may dream of traveling the world. You feel it's your calling, but you might still want to learn how to surf. So, in a year, you might achieve several goals, but choose not to pursue them in the following year. It's part of life experience. Also, completing a plan is such a rewarding thing to do that it boosts your self-esteem. Once you've defined your goals, you must figure out how to devote daily time to achieve them. Whether you're the president of NATO or an ordinary citizen, you get the same number of hours in a day. To make the most of them, you must live every moment to the fullest. You must rest well and deeply, eat food that gives you energy and not take it away. You must eliminate all bad habits and replace them with good ones. Dedicate one day of the week to concentrate on reaching your goal. Not only will it allow you to accomplish necessary tasks, but it will also give you a boost of self-esteem to perform your everyday work on the following days. If you need more time to stay focused, try starting with 10 minutes, then take a break and resume for another 10 minutes. The time is right. Without realizing it, you will have worked for 2 hours on your project. Remember, action is the essential key to seeing our dreams come true. You can spend your whole life properly planning your ambitious goal, but it will only happen once you start taking action. Chapter 4. It's willpower, not inspiration, that creates successful people. It should be quite obvious at this juncture that our ability to control our thoughts, emotions, and actions have a huge impact on almost every aspect of our lives. Success simply doesn't happen without willpower. We know we want to be in control of everything, from what we say, what we eat, and even to what we purchase. But with weak willpower, we're going to put our foot in our mouths, eat the donut that we know will ruin our health, and even purchase things we don't need, then failing to experience financial success. We may ruin personal relationships, stagnate in our careers, or worse, fall short in the happiness department simply because life feels like it is controlling us, instead of feeling as if we have more than enough skill and power to alter life's course. In brief, we need more than just self-discipline. We need willpower, and though we want to rely on it as little as possible, there are solid ways to develop it. In this chapter, you're going to learn about the difference between willpower and self-discipline, how willpower develops, and solid ways to increase your willpower so that on the occasion that you need it, and you'll know exactly what to do if your willpower is flagging. What's more, we're going to teach you how not to exhaust yourself even when you have high levels of willpower, and stop self-sabotaging your positive habits by using outdated and ineffective tools to create willpower. Brief history of the development of self-control. Before we dive into how to create high levels of willpower, let's look at why it became a necessity for human beings to have this positive trait. It all starts with prehistoric man and woman. For a long while, all we needed to worry about was getting our next meal, reproducing and avoiding being eaten by an animal larger than ourselves. As hominids evolved to develop opposable thumbs, the ability to use tools and employ highly refined socialization skills, we also developed self-control or willpower. This became necessary because we needed to make sure we didn't offend the close-knit communities and tribes we started to live in to survive. If we shacked up in a bush with our brother's wife, stole our cousin's wild foraged berries, or said something mean in an angry huff to the chieftain of our tribe, we might be excommunicated. left to fend for ourselves in the wild jungle or lion-ruled savanna, being able to control your urges, sexual, aggressive, and appetite-based, was of paramount importance to your survival. Not much has changed in the past several 100,000 years. For example, one of the most important elements of a successful marriage in modern society isn't empathy, but being able to keep your mouth shut and not offending your spouse. Willpower. One of the highest indicators of financial success is your ability to exert willpower. Another indicator of educational success is, again, willpower. We are all born with will, but some of us have taught ourselves how to exert it more often than not. In almost every way you can measure, higher willpower leads to more success. In our relationships, in our careers, and in every other metric you can think of. Much of the information presented in this chapter is from a Stanford community-based program, which was available to the general public and those interested in how to exert more willpower. And this course ended up being one of Stanford's most popular ever. When it was first presented, enrollments caused the class to be moved 4 different times. When the class was over, its teacher, a health psychologist named Kelly McGonigal, a Ph.D., received feedback saying that its contents were life-changing. The course was later turned into a book titled The Willpower Instinct, which became a New York Times bestseller. McGonigal has also taught parts of the course to employees of Google, dozens of businesses in Silicon Valley, and thousands of entrepreneurs, homemakers, and real-life people. Clue, along with the additional research in neuroscience, biology, and psychology that we will present, you will have actionable tools to help build willpower, including understanding why you fail to exert your will more often now after reading this chapter. You may be surprised to find that what you think you know about willpower now is absolutely wrong. We're here to set the record straight and empower you to develop willpower, self-discipline, and abundant positive habits that create long-term success and happiness. With self-awareness, you can build self-control. Now let's dive right into the whole science and application of willpower. The difference between willpower and self-discipline, the terms willpower and discipline are often used synonymously, but they aren't the same. Willpower is often said to be a useless strategy to help us overcome a weak internal locus of control, or a self-limiting behavior that isn't strong enough to overcome impulses. But there's more to it, and willpower, though not the ideal tool, can still be sharpened. If you can't seem to find the will to start a new exercise program, learn a new language, begin an important project, or even write 1 page of the best-selling novel that you've dreamt of writing, then you need to understand the difference between willpower and self-discipline. In the end, you need a little of both, willpower and self-discipline, to start and stick to a life-altering, habit-changing program. But one will quickly become the trait you rely on if you do it right. Webster Dictionary defines willpower as a correction or regulation of oneself for the sake of self-improvement. This is the underlying skill that allows us to build self-discipline. It is our ability to persevere even with internal conflict. Think of someone, if not yourself, trying to practice willpower at an office Christmas party. There is booze flowing in rivers, a smorgasbord of sugary, fattening treats on display, that hot intern you've been thinking of having an affair with, and the boss you've been wanting to school on a thing or two since your last review. Self-control, or willpower, is what allows you to drink herbal tea instead of alcohol, skip the tirade with your boss, turn down the second piece of fruitcake, And while it might be fun for a second, decide to save your marriage and stop flirting with the cute intern over the punch bowl. You understand the consequences of your behavior. You know that your spouse, boyfriend, or girlfriend might leave you if you cheat. Your skinny jeans won't fit anymore if you keep drinking the company's free beer. And your boss won't respect you if you speak to him after you've had a few and your defenses are down. You have the ability to look at what negative behaviors will do to your long-term goals, but also which positive behaviors that, if indulged in instead, will promote the achievement of your longer-term goals. Your willpower also amounts to what you say yes to. You can decide to spark the fire within your own relationship by bringing home flowers to your wife or planning a surprise update of your husband's man cave with a big screen television. You can decide ahead of the party that you're going to bring ingredients to make virgin pina coladas, so you feel fun and festive. And you can decide to save that speech for your boss and instead work out on a spreadsheet how much you are saving the company in black and white, so you can ask for a bigger raise at your next site. Down with him or her. Are your I will and I won't actions, both equally components of willpower, can be applied in so many different ways, from avoiding clicking on a link on a website that will take you down an infinite time-consuming rabbit hole to setting your alarm clock 5 minutes earlier every day for a week, until you, at the end of the week, waking up 35 minutes earlier than you were before the week started. Your actions now will affect your future weeks, months, and even years. One impulsive action now could sink you, but an action carried out with strong willpower and the self-discipline that is forged by these acts of will or impulse control, which we talk more about in a moment, will build a foundation for future, enduring success. You can think of the difference between self-discipline and willpower like this. Discipline is the thoughtless behavior that arises from conscious thought and the altered behavior that comes from developing your will. While we can't avoid stress, temptation, or pitfalls, when we use our willpower, it grows. Dealing with stress also builds character, grit, self-esteem, and our impulse control muscles so that when we do need to rely on them, in cases when our autopiloted positive habits fail, we can carry on in a positive direction. We won't end up sabotaging all forward momentum by that one piece of cake that throws us off our diet for a week, or that one naughty but inappropriate text which opens Pandora's box and makes showing up to work every day with an added temptation of a sexual ruse almost impossible to ignore. When we have a clear idea about what we want, we can use our willpower not only to say no to many things, but also to say yes to exactly what we do want. We have to start with willpower, but this turns into self-discipline, and once this muscle is developed, we can create positive habits that run almost as if they are happening by themselves. And ironically, willpower isn't needed unless we are facing a new challenge or a strong temptation. Establishing clear goals will help us know what we are saying yes to, so that when we must use willpower, it won't feel as if we are always saying no to life. Finding clarity on your goals and establishing positive habits, finding willpower via choosing positive action is a chicken and egg debate. You have to have some will or self-control to begin a new, positive set of goals, but you end up having self-discipline by exerting your will and successfully starting new habits that then become automatic, which takes little to no willpower. To understand willpower better, however, We need to talk a little about clarifying our goals on a few different levels: intellectual, emotional, and on the level of action, the physical level. Let's use Sarah as an example. Sarah often gets comments from her friends about how disciplined she is. When they go out to eat with her, she always sticks to her healthy eating plan, even in the face of serious temptation. She's been sticking to it for 2 years now, so anyone who has been around her for a decent duration sees her stick to her eating plan on a regular basis. Sarah would agree that she's somewhat disciplined with her healthy eating plan, but she's been doing it for so long now, it doesn't feel like it requires any willpower to turn things down that most people like to indulge in. Her eating is already habitual, and there happens to be a positive habit. When you ask Sarah how she is at exerting willpower in other areas of her life, the picture gets a little more confusing. She doesn't have a lot of willpower when it comes to her career. If you ask her, and she'll tell you that she's terrible about meeting new people, even though she really wants to meet a romantic companion that she's compatible with. She can't find the willpower to say yes to actions that would help her meet new people or develop her career, so she procrastinates and stagnates, and then feels bad about herself for not performing better in these areas. At first glance, it may seem that Sarah is just lucky in some areas that require willpower and unlucky in others, but if we look at her motivations and clarity about her goals, we'll be able to uncover why her healthy eating plan is going so well, and her goals to meet a quality guy and develop her career are floundering. Until she develops clarity on the intellectual and emotional levels in these two later departments, she won't experience the success that she's already shown in her healthy eating habits. Intellectual clarity is usually defined as the behaviors you know that you should engage in order to reach a goal. For example, you might think, I should better prepare for end-of-year performance reviews, or I should join a dating service. It might even show up as things you can intellectualize about your present life, like I should be able to spend more quality time with my children, or I should treat my friends better and call them more often. This intellectual clarity does not mean that you will develop instant willpower to put positive habits in action, even the small habits, as we've advised in previous chapters. We then need emotional clarity about a goal, and this ensures that our intellectual assumptions align with the consequences of developing an action plan. For example, you may intellectually believe that you would love worldwide travel because you long for a sense of adventure, but then go on a quick trip to California only to learn that worldwide travel might not be for you. You hate long lines to check baggage, more long lines to get through security, flight delays, and even being in an environment that is unfamiliar to you. Conversely, you may have a little taste of travel and find that it is exactly what you love. You adore being introduced to other cultures, new topography, and new languages in diverse parts of the planet. You can easily imagine, through an emotional response, what it feels like to travel around the world tasting new foods, seeing rare sights, and visiting with new friends. These emotions would then be much more motivating to you if you've equated travel with adventure. If you didn't love travel, then you might find that all you need is a trip to a new restaurant with a blind date to feel the same sense of anticipation, excitement, and varied experience that brings you joy and pleasure. Discipline then, and the exertion of willpower comes when you can then have physical clarity about what needs to happen to achieve your ideal emotional state. Now you can put your clear goals and emotional alignment to those goals into action. And you wanted to take a trip around the world? You would then need to break down your big goal and develop smaller positive habits that would facilitate its completion. Perhaps saving money for travel by not eating out as often or making more money at your job, getting an updated passport and visas to travel to the countries that require them, planning your trip out with a travel planner, researching the best places to stay, and fun places to visit once you are in another country, and even learning a new language so that you can communicate when you get there. Whenever you didn't feel like skipping a meal out or feel like filling out paperwork for a new passport, uh, feel like learning a new language, you would have this strong emotional connection to the end goal and the clear image of how it would make you feel, so that your will is stronger and you can start to make these new habits automatic through repetition. Willpower is only truly effective when you have both intellectual and emotional clarity about the end results. This is how self-discipline is then formed. It is a consequence of being highly aligned on every level of your being with the final product or experience and the anticipation of it. Often when we lack willpower, it is because we lack emotional or intellectual clarity on what we truly want. In Sarah's case, she hasn't made progress on her personal relationship or career goals because she hasn't defined what her ultimate goal is in detail and attached an emotional reward to achieving those specific goals. When she began her healthy eating plan, it was with great determination to fit into a bathing suit for a vacation she planned. She lost 10 pounds and started to feel like she had more energy, so she stuck with the eating plan. She also observed that it became easier over time, and that all her clothes were fitting better. She seemed to concentrate better, and she did indeed fit into her bathing suit, which made her feel ecstatic. Her intellectual goal and emotional goal was aligned. If Sarah spent a little time defining why she wants a partner, to have someone to visit new cities with, or to have someone to share her feelings with, and to fall asleep next to in bed at night, then she would have more emotional clarity and be more motivated to sign up for a dating service, even though it is something that has been on her to-do list for 6 months. She'd be less likely to procrastinate with the emotional and intellectual clarity. The same applies to her career goals. As Sarah could also get emotional clarity by looking at the negative outcomes and the fears that are keeping her from achieving her dreams. For example, she could ask herself why she can't seem to force herself to talk to her boss about a raise or extend herself more often to others in a social context. Is it because she doesn't feel good enough? Does she feel incapable in some way? Does she fear she'll be rejected? Is she afraid she won't follow through? If too many of these thoughts are circling in her head, she will lack motivation to try to achieve the goal or even attempt new positive habit formation. With emotional clarity, you learn what is motivating you to say yes and what is motivating you to say no or do nothing. By addressing each of your fears head-on, or giving a little extra time and attention to your emotional yeses, then you'll have a higher level of willpower. Think about what excites you about achieving something, and also reframe your fears. Ask yourself when you've been able to overcome fears in the past. Carnegie believed that fear is a natural and necessary emotion that helps us stay safe and avoid danger. However, he also recognized that fear can be irrational and can hold us back from achieving our goals and living a fulfilling life. The root cause. According to Carnegie, the best way to overcome fear is to identify the source of it. This might be a specific situation. particular person or even a past experience that has left you feeling anxious or afraid. Once you know what is causing your fear, you can begin to address it directly. Confront your fear. Carnegie believed that the best way to overcome fear is to take action and face it head on. This might mean exposing yourself to the thing that scares you or taking small steps to gradually overcome your fear. For example, if you are afraid of public speaking, you might start by speaking in front of a small group of friends or family members and gradually work your way up to larger audiences. Positive outcomes. When facing your fears, Carnegie recommended focusing on the positive outcomes that could result from your actions. For example, if you are afraid of asking for promotion at work, you might remind yourself of the potential benefits, such as increased job satisfaction, higher pay, and greater opportunities for growth and advancement. Practice self-compassion. Carnegie recognized that overcoming fear can be a challenging process and that it is important to be kind to yourself along the way. He recommended practicing self-compassion and reminding yourself that it is okay to make mistakes or feel afraid at times. By treating yourself with kindness and understanding, you can build up your resilience and confidence over time. Here are some tips on how to practice self-compassion. Recognize your suffering.
The first step in practicing self-compassion is to acknowledge that you are suffering.
This may be physical or emotional pain, stress, or any other form of discomfort. Take a moment to identify what is causing your suffering and name it. Be kind to yourself. Once you have acknowledged your suffering, offer yourself kindness and compassion. This may involve saying kind words to yourself, such as "I am doing the best I can," or "I am worthy of love and care." You may also want to offer yourself physical gestures of kindness, such as giving yourself a hug or placing a hand on your heart. Chapter 5. Overcoming fear to gain self-confidence. Complete safety is an illusion. You need to understand that 100% safety is an illusion. If this is all you ever think about, you will not risk anything and you will live a life without any challenges. It is like aiming for perfection. No one and nothing is perfect, and no matter how safe, it is still not entirely safe. If you keep pursuing these impossible goals, then you will not live life. You need to embrace risks and challenges and look at them as part of growing as an individual. This is why when an opportunity arises, you need to seize it right away. Do not wait for yourself to be 100% prepared, because you can never fully prepare for anything. Although preparing for marriage and having kids is important, you should not wait too long, because you can never fully prepare for these kinds of things. There will be problems and challenges, and it is okay because they are part of life. If you keep on preparing, you might end up not trying at all. You might be missing out on some of the best opportunities and experiences of your life because there's always that feeling that you still have not done enough preparation. Keep in mind that being ready does not mean that your plan of action is 100% foolproof or that uncertainty is completely absent. It only means that you prepared for it as much as you can, and the next step would be to try. Time is ticking. Consistently remind yourself that you only have one life, and self-confidence time is continuously ticking. It will not wait for you to overcome your fear. Treat every day of your life as if it is your last, and you will find yourself doing things that you will not do if you know you have plenty of time to ponder and mull it over in your head. Grab that opportunity. Take that first step. What matters is the here and the now. If tomorrow does not come, at least you have lived a full life. Inject humor. Humor solves a lot of problems, and laughing it off when you feel fear creeping in is a great way to make light of the situation. Sometimes you take things too seriously without realizing it when you could be having fun. In scary movies, there's usually that one guy in the group who cracks jokes when things get serious, and you can see that it instantly eases the tension. If you feel afraid of doing something, then you should make a joke out of it. If you are in an important meeting with your bosses, and you can feel yourself shaking and sweating, you can crack a joke to make the mood lighter. Maybe tell them something like, "With the way I'm shaking and sweating, then you would think I'm going to propose to all of you." You have seen this in a lot of speeches, like at the Oscars and even in the president's public address. Humor makes things less serious and a lot easier to handle. It also instantly builds rapport and camaraderie between you and the people you are interacting with. Tell yourself that things are going to be okay and you are worrying over nothing. Ignore that negative little voice in your head. Remember that this voice in your head that tells you negative things, that you cannot do it, that you are not good enough, that is also you. You are your worst enemy. When you are in a situation and you start hearing this tiny voice in your head that puts you down, tell him to shut up. The truth is that the kind of voice that you hear represents how you view yourself. If the voice tells you negative things about yourself, it only means that you do not have confidence in yourself. If it is a voice that boosts you up, then you are on the right track because you already have the confidence that everyone needs. But you will not be reading this book in the first place if you already have confidence. So most likely you are hearing the negative voice. Deal with it by ignoring the voice and slowly but surely replacing it with the more positive one. Talk about your fear. If you keep your fear all bottled up inside, it will have a more lasting effect and might come out at the worst possible time. You need to deal with your fear as and when you feel it. Do not allow it to take its root in your mind until it consumes you. Soldiers are being taught to discuss their fear with mental health practitioners. This allows them to process what will happen or what had already transpired, or often than not, keeping their traumas bottled up inside only affects their relationships with their loved ones. If you feel afraid of doing something, you should not pretend that you are not scared at all. It also does not necessarily mean that you go directly to a therapist to talk. You can just tell a close friend or a loved one about what you are feeling and why you are feeling that way. Sometimes, when you say it out loud, it leaves your thoughts and it allows you to face your fear right away. It is also important to identify your fear. Give it a name, not Sarah or Michael. Specify what it is exactly you are afraid of. Say something like, "I am afraid to speak in public," or "I am scared to move to a different state." If you ignore your fear, it only grows inside you like a big monster. But if you face it head on, it becomes smaller and easier to crush. Then think about the future. The future is a big unknown, and a lot of people fear the future because they do not know what is in store for them. This is why you need to think long-term when it comes to facing your future. For instance, if you are afraid that your income will not be enough for your future kids, you should start doing something about it to alleviate this fear of the unknown future. Maybe you can find another job that pays better or start a business or sideline. You can then use the money to save up. It is a long-term plan, but at least it makes you feel a little less scared and more confident in your ability to start a family and raise your own kids. Educate yourself. It has been said many times that fear comes from the unknown. This is why it is important to learn more about the thing that scares you. If you are a non-native English speaker, and you are overcoming fear to gain self-confidence, planning to take an English test, and you feel scared that you will not pass, instead of wallowing in your fear, why not study and learn how the exam works? Arm yourself with facts rather than speculation and guesses, and you will see that your fear is often baseless. These are the things that you need to do to overcome fear and gain self-confidence. Most of the information in this book is about gaining self-confidence by overcoming fear, because fear is the biggest obstacle that you have to overcome to be confident in everything that you do. Mental and emotional toughness. Now that you know how the Spartans and Special Operations Forces train to achieve that level of confidence, you should now learn a few more techniques and tips that you can use in mental and emotional toughness for your everyday life, whether it is for your personal or work needs. Caring for your physical, emotional, and mental health. Taking care of your body is probably the easiest thing to do, although many people still neglect to do it. You need a balanced diet, do regular exercise, and get enough sleep every day. What about your emotional and mental health? Did you know that your mental and emotional health also affects your physical health? There's a physical manifestation such as high blood pressure, chest pain, and ulcers if you don't take care of your mental and emotional health properly. Do not allow it to come to this, and read the following tips on how to care for your mental and emotional health. See, boost your support system. You have to strengthen your circle of friends who will be there to support you when you need it. This does not necessarily mean that you have to be friends with more people. According to the Spartans, the minimalism is the key to success, and you should eliminate the ones that you do not need. It means that you should focus more on the quality of your friendships than quantity. Just maintain friendship with the ones that are genuinely your friends. Friendship goes both ways. These are people who you know will be there for you through hell and high waters, and you know in your heart that you will also do the same. Chapter 6. Prepare for worst-case scenarios. The key to overcoming fear is preparation. As you probably already know by now after reading the first few chapters of this book, Special Ops soldiers were taught to come up with different worst-case scenarios and find ways on how to overcome these. They are taught to rehearse for adversity so that when the actual adversity does happen, they would know what to do. You might think this is counterintuitive, focusing on worst-case scenarios when you are trying to overcome fear. But this is helpful because at least you are using your mind to come up with solutions instead of simply telling yourself that you cannot do it. Michael Phelps' goggles flooded while swimming at the Olympics and he could not see at all. But he rehearsed the scenarios so many times, so even if his goggles were flooded, he just counted the number of strokes and did his flip turn at the perfect time. And he won. You can apply this in your everyday life. If you have a job interview, you should prepare not only for the questions that interviewers usually ask, but also issues that might come up. Like when you are asked a question you genuinely do not know the answer to. But maybe your solution is to just be honest about it, but tell the interviewer that you are willing to learn. Having a contingency plan in place makes you feel more confident about the thing that you are supposed to do. Be mindful. Overthinking is like having a mind like an untrained puppy leaping and bounding excitedly after every single thing that crosses its path with zero discipline or self-awareness. But with meditation, you can train yourself to see that you don't necessarily have to get on board with every passing thought that comes your way. Just because you have a thought doesn't mean you have to keep having it. Just because a thought came along doesn't mean anything. You don't even have to appraise whether a thought is a good or bad thought. If you want to sit peacefully and quietly, you can do that without entertaining any thought. Imagine your stream of consciousness is a literal stream. Every time you have a thought, see it as a thought and imagine it in the stream quickly washing away again, gone forever. If your thoughts start becoming a bit meta, you worry about how well you're doing. For example, just watch as that thought also goes flowing into the stream and away. Practice such an exercise for 10 minutes a day and you will strengthen your ability to see that thoughts can and always will pop into our minds. But we always get to choose what happens next. Schedule, fixed worry, time. Remember that the lie of rumination is that worry and anxiety are somehow useful, and that going over and over things in your head will somehow help you avoid disaster. It's not true. One way to remind yourself of this is to acknowledge that your worry can serve a small purpose, but that it will do so on your terms and on a schedule of your choosing. Try this next time your mind seems to be running away with you. Imagine saying to your anxious mind, thank you. That's a good point. I'll make a note of it. Then take a notebook and write down a line or two to capture this worry. For example, my in-laws are going to hate the Christmas presents I bought them and judge me. And now look at the worry that you set down in the notebook and consciously tell yourself, I don't have to worry about this anymore because I've noted it down and won't forget about it. When you catch the thought popping up in your mind later on, quickly tell it, oh, thanks for the reminder, but I've already sorted that out. It's in the notebook. Then, once a day, engage in your designated worry time. Give yourself a full, uninterrupted 15 or 20-minute block of time where you do nothing but worry about the things in your book. The agreement is that you can do as much worrying as you like during this period, but that you won't worry outside of it, except to note things in your book for later. Few things may happen. You realize how utterly boring and repetitive your mind can be. At the time it felt like a million different worries, but it's really just the same 2 or 3 churning round and round. You notice how worrying about something and not worrying about it pretty much amounts to the same thing at the end of the day. So why worry about it? You see how some things that seemed life or death important in the morning suddenly seem irrelevant in the afternoon. But nothing can prove to you just how fickle and empty rumination is as seeing yourself follow it here, there, and everywhere. Isn't it exhausting? You may begin to see that worry actually doesn't solve any problems. Either what you were anxious about never came to pass, or it was abstract and irrelevant in the first place, or it resolved itself without your anxious interference. You may discover that you arrive at your worry time feeling like you don't want to worry. Take a closer look at that feeling and ask where it comes from. Be curious about what thoughts you keep putting down. Could these be core beliefs from your inner critic that you can slowly start to challenge and reframe? Externalize. Remember that anxiety is there to be discharged into the environment and channeled into intelligent action. When you catch yourself overthinking, ask yourself, what action will help me clear and release this anxiety? If you've been up all night worrying about a medical condition, stop and make an appointment with a doctor then and there. If you're in anguish wondering what your crush thinks about you, stop and just ask them. If you're putting off a work assignment and can't stop ruminating about how awful it will be when you miss the deadline and get fired, stop and take the first small step to starting the project. If you start ruminating again, stop and carefully think about the next step, no matter how small. You get the idea. One outcome is that you will see that it's better to act than to worry about a million vague possibilities and potentials. Occasionally the right action is very obvious and easy to do. Other times you may need to spend some time strategizing. Some parts of a situation will be under your control, while other parts won't. Instead of ruminating, think carefully about your zone of control and make a plan for what you'll do next, even if you can't act right now. Second outcome is that you'll see that you cannot in fact take action because the thing you're worried about is actually not in your control. In this case, pause and really absorb that this is the reality. You cannot do anything about the problem. If you worry about it, it is what it is. If you don't worry about it, it is what it is. Shine a clear light on the fact that continuing to worry at that point is a choice you'll be making, a choice to deliberately feel bad for no good reason. Sometimes externalizing takes the form of putting up a long overdue boundary or of choosing to let something unhealthy go from your life. Sometimes what's needed is a conversation when we talk to ourselves in our own heads But a conversation tends to be small, repetitive, and circular. When we talk to others, our worries can move and breathe as other people weigh in, challenge, support, or suggest something we hadn't thought of. Having a genuine dialogue is sometimes the best cure for a toxic inner monologue. Finally, don't underestimate the power of distraction. The action you take might actually have no relationship to the ruminations. For example, many people find that once they start getting anxious and too inward-focused, they need to get outdoors and do a long run or deep clean the house or even head to the mall where they can completely forget themselves for a moment. Abruptly switch tasks and literally move to another room or out of the house entirely. I mean, your anxiety for meaning, of course. Sometimes the action hidden in our anxiety really is a little more abstract. In this case, after ruminating on negative social experiences, try to extract any valuable lessons. Ask yourself questions like, what can I learn from this? And what is the lesson here? This shift in perspective can help you move forward constructively. Learning a lesson about an unpleasant experience is one way to get a kind of closure on it, and a way to tell your mind, okay, we can move past this now. Experts have theorized that those who experience PTSD revisit and reimagine the traumatizing experience because something in them wants to fix the problem, to figure out why things went wrong, and to regain some kind of control over it, even if only in hindsight. And that's why so many PTSD sufferers find some relief in making meaning from their experience, whether that's going on to help and support others who've endured the same thing, activism, finding spiritual or philosophical significance in their story, rediscovering their values and principles, or enjoying the fact of their own growth and development as human beings. On a smaller scale, you can do the same thing. Instead of, for example, stewing over the thought, I embarrassed myself like an idiot, think instead, what do I now know about how to do a presentation next time around? Well, what can I improve on? Shifting into a positive learning mindset makes your pain or discomfort mean something, and that makes it easier to move on from. Exposure therapy. Exposure therapy is a classic cognitive behavioral approach and is essentially an attempt to break down negative associations and conditioned responses and set up conditions where new ones can be formed. Anxiety, the theory says, is a learned and conditioned response, and that means it can be unlearned. If you continue to experience what you believe is an intolerable and threatening situation, but remain with it long enough to repeatedly see that it does not bring about the feared outcome, you will gradually teach yourself that the belief this is a scary thing is no longer founded. In exposure therapy, you choose to face your feared situation, and in so doing, you dampen the ordinary anxiety response until it fades altogether. Sometimes you can speed up this process by deliberately connecting the situation and the triggers in it to something positive, i.e., something other than fear and avoidance. For example, a common technique is to learn to interpret certain sensations, increased heartbeat, sweaty palms, as excitement rather than fear. The trouble with phobias, anxieties, and all other forms of fearful avoidance is that usually the person has had plenty of opportunity to teach themselves that escaping is an effective strategy. They tend to flee feared situations, avoid them altogether, or deliberately interpret neutral stimuli as threatening. The result is that even though they may be exposed to the situation, they are still not learning to tolerate it. And therefore, the name exposure therapy is a bit misleading. It is not always exposure alone that will cure anxiety or phobia. Rather, it's the deliberate efforts we make to learn new behaviors, attitudes, thoughts, and feelings about how we respond to that exposure and how we deal with our discomfort. Ideally, exposure therapy, systematic desensitization, Flooding and other techniques are best practiced with a trained therapist who can ensure you're taking an approach that best fits your unique situation. But there are many tricks you can do yourself without the help of a professional, as long as you understand the basic principles. One such trick is to use graded exposures, or more simply, baby steps. Throwing yourself into the deep end and facing your worst nightmare with no warm-up or preparation may backfire, because it cements in your mind the idea that the situation is indeed terrifying. If you then escape that terrifying situation without ever learning to cope with it differently, you have only reinforced your conditioned response to escape, making it more likely next time. On the other hand, going too slowly risks leaving the old associations completely intact and confirming in your mind that they cannot be changed. Graded exposure, step by step. Step 1. Identify your fear. What is the situation, place, or activity that you're most anxious about? If there are more than one, or your fears are a little vague and diffuse, try to identify the most frightening, or pick a single concrete situation where you feel your anxiety would be highest. Work with one at a time. For example, you might decide that going to a party where you know nobody there and having to talk to strangers is the biggest issue for you currently. Step 2. Break it down. Take this situation and break it down into different parts or variations. In our example, you might identify the following: going to a party where you know everyone, going to a party where you know just one or two people, going to a party where you know nobody at all, going to a small gathering at a coffee shop, going to a small gathering at a pub or bar, going to a smaller meeting at a good friend's house, going to a bigger meetup at a friend's house, having a one-on-one chat with a close friend at home, having a one-on-one chat with an acquaintance at home, having a one-on-one chat with a stranger at home, having a one-on-one chat with a stranger at a party where you know nobody, and so on. Take your time doing this. No two lists will be the same. You want a nice mix of at least 10, but preferably more. Step 3. Rank them now. Look at the list and rank how anxious you would feel doing each of these activities, from 0 to 100, where 100 represents the most anxious you could possibly feel. Arrange the list in order. For example, having a one-on-one chat with a stranger at a party where you know nobody, 100. Going to a party where you know nobody at all, 90. Going to a party where you know just one or two people, 85. Going to a party where you know everyone, 83. Going to a small gathering at a pub or bar, 80. Going to a small gathering at a coffee shop, 72. Going to a bigger meetup at a friend's house, 45. Going to a smaller meeting at a good friend's house, 43. Having a one chat with a stranger at home, 40. Having a one chat with an acquaintance at home, 35. Having a one-on-one chat with a close friend at home, 25. This exercise should help you get a clearer idea of what elements are actually having the greatest impact in a situation. In our example, big noisy party venues are more anxiety-provoking than strangers. You may not get so nuanced and fine-grained an understanding of your fear if you always escape it. However, as you piece it together, imagine that you are building a nice, even ladder that takes you smoothly from where you are to where you want to be. Good ladder has enough steps, and the steps are roughly the same distance from one another. In our example, it might be worth brainstorming a few additional activities between a big meetup at a friend's house and a small gathering at a coffee shop, so that the jump from one to the other isn't too overwhelming. Perhaps you decide to include a few trips to a location that you find slightly scarier than a coffee shop, but not as scary as a pub or bar. You might add eating at a trendy restaurant during the day and eating at a trendy restaurant during a weekend evening when they're really busy to the list, and rank them accordingly. 2 things to remember. The list is yours alone and will be completely subjective. Plus, it's not permanent. You can make changes as you go. You might find that you need smaller, finer gradations once you start, or that a few activities can be lumped together once you discover they're not scary after all. Step 4. Optional. Practice relaxation. Drill and rehearse any favorite technique for calming yourself down. One method is the safe place we've already discussed, but you can use any combination of breathing, exercise, visualization, mindfulness, or muscle release to actively bring yourself to a calmer state. Well, whatever it is, make sure you've practiced it enough times in preparation so that you know how to access it at will. Step 4. Begin. Start at the bottom of the ladder and do the first activity. Remember that you are not trapped or forcing yourself to do it. You are choosing to. That said, the point is to remain with the situation and not escape. Complete the task, and as you do so, choose to mentally coach yourself with positive, supportive self-talk. You're doing great. You're okay and you can manage this. You're in control. You're safe. You could combine this step with other techniques already discovered, such as rehearsing ahead of time how you imagine you'll tackle this task, but also playing the role of someone who isn't afraid of the situation and doing what they would do. As you complete the task, it's extremely important to try to dampen your anxiety response. For example, by using the relaxation technique from step 3, you might have a one-on-one chat with a friend in your home and consciously pair this with a breathing exercise and a visualization technique before and after to ground you. What you are doing is deliberately pairing the feared situation with feelings of calm and relaxation. It is possible to simply stay with the situation until you no longer feel anxious, but this may take a while. And besides, you can speed up the process by proactively bringing yourself into that calmer frame of mind. Whatever you do, don't try to avoid, escape, or distract yourself. Stay with it. Step 5. Climb the ladder. When you've completed one rung of the ladder, pause and take a moment to congratulate yourself and celebrate the milestone. You want to really feel comfortable at that level before moving on to the next one. So don't worry if you want to repeat the task a few times until you no longer feel that dread or panic. You want the task to feel neutral and easy, like you're indifferent to it. Give yourself a little time to adapt your own self-concept and your core beliefs as you go. Especially at the higher levels, you might start to see that you are regularly encountering evidence against your beliefs and assumptions. Take the time to notice this has happened, and then consciously update old beliefs to reflect your progress. Repeat these to yourself as you climb the ladder. You are giving yourself new learning opportunities, and each one is an experience that teaches you that you can do things you once thought were too frightening. Stepping outside your comfort zone. Graded exposure is great for helping you overcome fears and phobias, but even if you don't have some major hang-up to beat, then there is a way to consciously choose to live just outside your comfort zone. The idea is not to continually scare the daylights out of yourself by constantly attempting really terrifying things, but to stay clear of that really boring, safe, and predictable realm. The sweet spot is somewhere in the middle, where you are gently challenged, excited, inspired, and ever so slightly on your toes. For example, if you're used to saying hi to a colleague and that feels easy, push yourself to say hi and just a few things more. Or make a little joke. If you're used to walking everywhere with your head down, just lift your gaze now and then to make eye contact or smile at people. Instead of eating lunch alone, sit with others you ordinarily would have avoided. What you want to do is train a general appreciation for novelty and slight discomfort, rather than teaching yourself to overvalue avoidance. You want to make moving toward a way of life and continually counter a tendency to move away from. Identify the specific behavior you want to change. Focus on one behavior at a time to make the process manageable. Examples include texting instead of calling, avoiding eye contact, not suggesting social outings, waiting for others to initiate contact, rehearsing social interactions, or not participating in discussions at work or in class. Understand why you want to change the behavior. Recognize that discomfort may arise during the process of acquiring a new skill or learning. Stay connected to the reason behind your decision to change, which could be, for example, feeling more connected to colleagues at work. Determine how you will make the change, and practice comfort zone challenges. Decide whether you will take a big step or start with smaller, more gradual changes. But below are comfort zone challenges you can try. Order food and have a quick conversation with the cashier. Attend a meetup group. FaceTime someone you haven't talked to in a while and catch up with them about their approach a random girl guy on the street and give them a compliment. Tell someone important in your life how much you care about them. Letting go of safety-seeking behaviors. From the perspective of anxiety, the solution to encountering something scary is to remove yourself from it in any way possible. Run away, avoid it, or escape. This is probably a brilliant strategy when faced with a snarling wild animal who wants to eat you. But things get complicated when the thing you've decided is scary is simply other people. Sharing your opinion or being in a crowded place. In the context of social anxiety, the concept of safety behaviors refers to certain coping mechanisms or avoidance strategies that individuals may adopt to protect themselves from perceived threats or negative judgments. The emphasis here is on the perceived nature of that threat. Usually, safety-seeking and escape avoidance behaviors get cemented as habits because, in their way, they work. For example, we may feel anxious when we're speaking up in a group of people. The situation might instantly trigger feelings of panic and discomfort, and all at once our head fills with ideas like they're judging me and you're making a fool of yourself and everyone can see. So immediately you do whatever it takes to ease these awful feelings. You decide to never, ever speak up in a group. You keep quiet and your anxiety lowers. The next time you're in a group, your brain sees two paths in front of it. One is to speak up and feel anxious about it. The other is to say nothing and feel safe and comfortable. Easy to see which one you'd go for. Right. In fact, part of your solution might be to carefully convince yourself that it really is in your best interests to never share your opinion, to never contribute to group conversations, and to bite your tongue. You may start to believe that never speaking up is a more or less fixed part of your identity and can't be changed anyway, because avoidance and escape make you feel better in the moment. You mistake them for genuine solutions, and very quickly you lose sight of the fact that the thing you're escaping and avoiding was never a genuine threat in the first place. The problem was your perception of the threat. The solution was to correct this perception, not to escape the threat. In the case of social anxiety, safety behaviors may include positioning yourself so as to avoid excessive scrutiny, e.g., hiding in the back row of the classroom or wearing dull and unassuming clothes so as not to draw attention to yourself. Taking on roles in social situations so you don't have to interact fully with others, for example, keeping busy and bustling behind the scenes, helping in the kitchen, being the one in charge of drinks so that you can constantly have an excuse to stand up and leave the room. Misusing alcohol, drugs, or other substances to manage anxiety, endlessly checking on screens and gadgets to distract yourself and create a kind of buffer between you and others. A common example is to set up social interactions in front of the TV, which will help cover up awkward silences and cut down on the need for eye contact. Over preparing what you want to say and rehearsing scripts, in an attempt to avoid uncertainty and spontaneity, you're continually keeping focus on other people by asking them questions and talking about them, but rapidly deflecting when they ask about you. being extremely accommodating and polite, trying to say all the right things, people pleasing and overly formalized or rule-bound interactions. This is an attempt to escape making a fool of yourself, being judged by others, or inadvertently hurting or offending someone. But safety-seeking behaviors can be even more subtle than this. Consider the following extreme example where someone is deathly afraid of doorknobs. They cannot even bear thinking about the existence of doorknobs, let alone seeing or touching one. When the thought of a doorknob pops into their head, they freak out and immediately start practicing a breathing exercise they learned in their meditation class to calm them down. They slow their breathing, squeeze their eyes shut, and then repeat the mantra over and over. You're okay? You're okay. Soon, they're not thinking about the doorknob anymore. And the next day, when someone asks about it, they confidently say that they are working on their anxiety and making progress with their doorknob phobia. But are they? When they act as though doorknobs are a genuine threat, one requiring immediate intervention with a complicated breathing technique? They are just confirming for themselves the fact that doorknobs really are dangerous. Avoiding a fear is not solving the problem. It may feel like it because you instantly relieve your anxiety, but the problem, your incorrect appraisal of threat, is just as strong as ever, if not more so. To truly make progress with a doorknob phobia, your goal would not be to find a way to live without ever seeing one, but rather to teach yourself to progressively be around doorknobs without allowing yourself to escape. Only with repeated exposure to the so-called threat can you start to give yourself an experience where the worst doesn't happen. You'll learn to tolerate what was once feared to be intolerable. The big insight with safety-seeking behaviors is that they were never about safety at all, just avoidance. Imagine a man who walks around town with a little mouse in his pocket. The people ask him why, and he explains that he is terrified of elephants, and he's heard that elephants are afraid of mice. So, as long as he has one, he reasons he'll be safe. If you tell him that he's being silly because the likelihood of an elephant bothering him is extremely low, he replies that of course that's the case, thanks to his mouse. Think about what you would tell this man to try to convince him that his safety-seeking behavior, his mouse, was unnecessary. How could you convince him that the thing he was afraid of in the first place was not really based in reality? Chances are you'd say something like, well, leave the mouse at home for a week and walk around town, and you'll see that no elephants will bother you. Essentially, letting go of our safety-seeking behaviors is a little like leaving the mouse at home, even though we're convinced it's the thing keeping us safe, and even though we really believe that an elephant could be prowling the streets and could attack us at any moment. But one more distinction before we move on. Not everyone who has a mouse is participating in safety-seeking. You need to look at your own unique situation and be clear about how certain behaviors are functioning in your life. One person may carry a mouse simply because they like mice and they're a little eccentric. Similarly, wearing drab clothing, drinking too much, or asking a lot of questions doesn't necessarily have anything to do with anxiety. It's about why those behaviors are there. You'll know a behavior is a problem if you feel disproportionately panicked at the thought of not being able to do it. That's a clue to the role it plays in your life. Safety-seeking encompasses any behavior designed to prevent us from directly confronting our fears. They needn't be rational, they often aren't, and they needn't be pure behaviors either, and can include more mental avoidance strategies like denial or making excuses and justifications. Relying on these safety behaviors prevents us from ever testing the validity of our fears against reality, which can then just deepen our fears and make them more stubborn. By directly facing our fear and approaching rather than avoiding it, we have a chance to challenge our distorted predictions. Gradually, these fears lose their emotional grip and no longer dictate our actions. Another consequence of safety behaviors is their potential to become self-fulfilling prophecies. For example, when you Stay silent in work meetings to avoid making mistakes. And naturally, you don't make any mistakes. But that means that you never learn the lessons you might have learned from making those mistakes. You never learn to be a more confident and comfortable speaker, and you slowly lose the ability to articulate yourself properly. If you finally do speak up, you're a little rusty and more likely to stumble on your words or express yourself poorly, just because you're out of practice. You may be so good at never sharing your opinion that when you finally do, you realize just how poorly formed it is. That's because you have denied yourself the chance to put that opinion out into the world, where it could interact with others and be refined, adjusted, and improved. When you decided you couldn't bear making a mistake, and you sought safety instead, you felt better in the short term, but you didn't realize that you simultaneously forfeited some positive experiences too. You could have experienced what it feels like to make a big fat mistake, and for the world not to end. Safety-seeking behaviors are dangerous because they lure us with a false premise. We may wrongly attribute our safety measures as the cause of preventing these fears, of saving us from something we can't bear. The solution is simple but not easy. Face your fears without allowing yourself access to your safety-seeking behaviors. Sit with your anxiety until it subsides. Don't run from that discomfort. Learn to tolerate and accept it. Here's a quick rundown of how to do that. Step 1. Identify your safety-seeking behaviors and what you're hoping to save yourself from by engaging in those behaviors. To start to tune into some of your safety behaviors, ask yourself the following. When you can't avoid a situation, what do you do to make yourself feel less anxious? When you feel anxious in a social situation, what do you do to avoid attention? When you feel anxious in a social situation, what do you do to come across better to others? There's situations that you have approached lots of times, but that you are still anxious about. What do you do in this situation to reduce your anxiety? For example, you might notice that you tend to mindlessly scroll through your phone, or plug in some earphones in social situations to avoid having to think of something to say to people around you, and having them judge you because you can't come up with anything interesting or witty to say. Perhaps you notice that you tend to make corny jokes to prevent the conversation from evolving in certain directions, where you might be out of your depth. You notice that your safety-seeking behavior is a diversion tactic to save you from being put on the spot and expected to say something intelligent. Step 2. Plan an experiment where you will deliberately drop one or more of your safety behaviors. What are you worried will happen if you don't do this behavior? Carefully note down what might happen if you just sat with, rather than try to escape that discomfort. Plan ahead of time how you're going to observe the results of this experiment. If you're used to keeping quiet in groups, and you challenge yourself to see what happens when you speak up, try also to notice what happens when you do. Are people really as bored, uninterested, or hostile as you imagine they'd be? Ask yourself what evidence might suggest that you were right to fear speaking up. For example, people would tell you to keep quiet, ignore you, or insult you. Remind yourself to actively look for any of these behaviors. Do people really behave as you thought they might? Step 3. Run the experiment. Analyze your data. Take note of what actually happened when you went against your safety-seeking behavior. Perhaps you spoke up in a meeting or left your earphones at home deliberately. Maybe it was scary and uncomfortable at first, but you quickly noticed that people were usually kind or, at worst, just neutral. Take the time to notice that you can be okay with situations you've previously found difficult. Look at how you coped and become curious about how you might do more of that. Consider your beliefs about yourself and the situation and see if they might need adjustment. And forget to celebrate as well. Facing your fears takes courage, but isn't it great to see concrete evidence that you can do it? Give praise where it's due, and see what experiment you'd like to commit to next. Maybe next time you speak up in a group, you want to try sharing an opinion you know is not so popular. How will that feel? Safety-seeking behaviors are a subtle kind of avoidance. They help you feel safe in the short term, but only maintain your anxiety in the long run. But your safety-seeking behaviors will be unique to you, so it's worth taking the time to pay attention to exactly what you do to reduce anxiety and how you could choose healthier approaches. If you'd feel anxious without it, the behavior is probably safety-seeking. Dropping this habit may increase anxiety in the short term, but it will free you from your fears in the long run. Social exhaustion. Imagine two of your old school friends are coming to your town, and you're meeting up after not seeing them for months. You miss them both and love spending time with them. They're your oldest and closest friends. Week in advance, you start planning their visit and all the fun stuff you'll do together when they arrive over the weekend. You're genuinely excited, but somehow when Friday rolls around, you're feeling the tiniest bit of dread. It's been a long week at work and you're frankly tired. If you go ahead with the plans but find yourself almost forcing a smile, almost pretending that you're having more fun than you really are. And as the visit wears on, if you get more and more anxious and annoyed, by the end of the evening, you're just wishing everyone would go away and leave you alone because you're tired and grumpy. You're not quite as charming a conversationalist as you can be, and end up saying a few awkward things, and then feeling more awkward. You get a little quiet, and others pick up on it. Somehow, chatting gradually feels like a grind, and soon it's clear that nobody is really enjoying themselves. By the time your friends leave at the end of the weekend, you're pretty exhausted. Your mood is dark, and you find yourself dwelling on all the irritating faults and flaws in them that you never quite noticed before. You think to yourself, I'm just so awkward and socially anxious. I'm such an introvert, and people are such a headache. Why bother when it's so much hassle to socialize? You completely forget that these are your friends, that you were looking forward to seeing them, and that ordinarily you love hanging out with them. So what happened? The truth is, you might not be socially anxious or introverted at all. You might just have been trying to socialize when your social battery was depleted. Social exhaustion isn't an officially recognized condition by the American Psychological Association, APAA, but it's a concept that will instantly resonate with many people. Social exhaustion generally refers to feeling drained and overstimulated after spending time with others. It can manifest differently for each individual depending on their level of extroversion or introversion and may vary across life stages. Signs of social exhaustion include increased irritability, escalating impatience, and a lack of joy in social engagements that were previously enjoyable. Sound familiar? The reason we'll explore social exhaustion here is that its symptoms often mimic those of social anxiety, but its treatment couldn't be more different. After a few years of COVID lockdowns and with many of us awkwardly re-emerging into the workplace after working from home, social exhaustion has been easier to notice than ever before. Work chit-chat, meetings, and social events with colleagues that previously seemed manageable suddenly seem overwhelming. The consequences may not always be obvious while at work, either. People may experience social exhaustion during office hours or when engaging in social activities outside of work, feeling like they no longer get the same satisfaction from those interactions as they once did. For some, social exhaustion is confusing because they genuinely crave social interaction on one hand, but feel drained and annoyed when it happens. Well, what can be done? First of all, recognize the difference between fearing social interactions and finding them awkward, uncomfortable versus being socially exhausted. In the same way you wouldn't say you were unfit just because you needed to take a break after a heavy workout. It doesn't make sense to say that you lack social skills because you find socializing difficult after you've done a lot of it. What's more, if you're consciously trying to develop objectively weak social skills, you may be pushing yourself far out of your comfort zone and socializing more than you're used to. And this is tiring. Recognize it as tiring and give yourself appropriate time to recharge and regenerate. When our social skills are poorly developed, when we are introverted, or when we have social anxiety that tends to make us withdraw from people, we are not just missing out on opportunities to strengthen those skills. Well, we are also missing out on another invisible skill set, the ability to manage our energy levels, to take breaks, to practice self-care, and to have appropriate boundaries around our time and resources. The irony is that the extroverted social butterfly may actually be better than the shy introvert when it comes to budgeting their energy and time. Overextending yourself and becoming exhausted is a real risk for introverts or previously socially anxious people, precisely because they don't have much practice in negotiating their upper bound of social interaction. They are usually too busy fixing the problem of too little social interaction to ever have to learn to manage too much. Add in the fact that introverts have often had a lifetime of people telling them to constantly cheer up and be more extroverted, that they fail to recognize that it's perfectly possible to turn down social interaction for reasons other than anxiety. Here are some ways to start being mindful of your own limitations and working with them. Be clear about your boundaries. Sometimes you need to challenge yourself and not give your excuses and fears too much credit, but occasionally you'll need to know where your limits are and be the first one to respect and honor them. For example, someone might be tackling social anxiety, but also genuinely does not enjoy going to bars or drinking heavily. By carefully separating their own values and boundaries from their fears, they can confidently know when to push themselves to be more social, for example, joining that interesting pottery group, and when to say no, for example, when pressured to drink too much by a crowd that cannot envision a social event that doesn't include alcohol. In a similar vein, find your assertiveness and be okay with telling others when you're tired and ready to call a social event to a close. If you want to go home, that's okay. If you feel that hanging out with the same group of people 4 times a week is way too much, say so. When you can confidently express your boundaries without making it anyone's fault. If you teach other people to respect those limits too, in fact, you'd be surprised how many people will appreciate the honesty and maybe even start being more candid with you in return. Plan ahead. Think of your social energy tank like a literal fuel tank in a car. You wouldn't plan a week of driving out into the middle of nowhere with only a half tank without thinking about when and where you'd refuel. Yet, sometimes people plan social events in this way, without leaving enough time and space to recharge themselves afterward. Leave yourself enough nothing time before and after, when you can just decompress and do nothing. Zone out in front of the TV, or putter around the house, or take a nap. Try not to plan too many demanding things in a row. Social exhaustion is not the same as physical exhaustion. The only way you can really rest socially is to be on your own. And that means that even being around people you live with can be too much. Try to take an hour to yourself in nature, leave the house, or lock the bathroom door and have a relaxing bath where you can tune everyone out. During the event, avoid trying to white-knuckle things. Take frequent breaks and give yourself permission to take it easy. Isn't it strange how often socially anxious people hold themselves responsible for everyone having a good time, or assume that they have to be energized and exciting and entertaining? Let yourself off the hook. Make your only goal to be yourself and to engage with others. There is no report card at the end. Think in terms of quality and not quantity. It's much healthier and easier to focus your efforts and make genuine connections with people Rather than counting the number of events you attend or tallying up the number of hours you spent doing this or not. Perhaps it's a hangover from school days where popularity was just about the sheer number of friends you had. But there really is no reason to have some arbitrary idea of how often you should be out every evening, or how many friends you should have. It's about how well you engage with those people. Give yourself time and practice self-compassion. If you're overcoming some social anxiety, it will feel scary at first. It helps to have realistic expectations of yourself and to not be too quick to beat yourself up if you're not moving as fast as you believe you should be. There's that pesky word again, should. Try not to compare yourself to anyone else. Recognize the signs that your tank is getting empty and be ready to step back and recharge. This is your responsibility. There's no point pushing yourself and then getting annoyed with other people for making demands on you. If you notice yourself getting cranky, unfocused, or bored, just gracefully find a way to end the interaction. With socializing, there is a wisdom in quitting while you're ahead. Don't be afraid to reevaluate certain relationships or situations. Do you have someone who frequently guilts you or shames you or pressures you to do things you're not really comfortable doing? Are you in a job where it's difficult to take care of your own health and well-being? Are you carrying too much of the social burden in your relationship? Or are you caught in a toxic family situation? Be kind to yourself and make those necessary changes to start creating a healthier, more balanced social life. Chapter 7. Systematic Desensitization. A systematic desensitization therapy is a type of behavioral therapy used to treat things like anxiety, phobias, OCD, and PTSD. The idea is that people can be conditioned to avoid or be repelled by a certain stimulus in just the same way that Pavlov's dogs were conditioned to salivate whenever the bell rang and signaled that food was coming. But if these associations can be conditioned, the theory goes that means they can also be deconditioned. So, for example, in the past, you might have had a very embarrassing and uncomfortable encounter where you met someone new. Your brain made the link. Meeting someone new equals painful feelings of embarrassment. The next time you were due to meet someone new, you instantly felt aversion and worry, as though in preparation for the stimulus, meeting someone new, to produce the same response, feelings of embarrassment. Scientists and psychologists have been studying conditioning for a long time, but you don't have to have an extreme phobia to be subject to its basic principles. If you have places and objects that remind you of a bad time in your past or a specific person you dislike, if you find yourself irrationally avoiding certain situations, or if your bad moods always seem to happen at particular times of day, then you may be experiencing the power of conditioning and association. A systematic desensitization is a way to use counter-conditioning, i.e., to consciously decide which stimuli to expose ourselves to and how to manage and train our responses to them. Very broadly, the idea is simple. Expose yourself to the thing you fear in small quantities while you link the experience to feelings of relaxation. Then ramp up the stimulus and repeat until you have learned to tolerate the stimulus without going into anxious fight-or-flight mode. This process is usually done with a trained therapist, but you can do it yourself if you pay close attention to the two ingredients required. Graded exposure, i.e., moving through a hierarchy of stimuli. 2. Relaxation. The key is to combine these effectively. If you are merely exposing yourself to things that freak you out, you will only reinforce those pathways and become more effective at freaking out. Similarly, if you only relax, you are not really challenging yourself to learn a different response. You need to pair the relaxation with the graded exposure for this technique to have any effect. Take a classic example. You're afraid of spiders. You construct a graded exposure ladder going from 1 to 10. 1 is thinking about spiders. 2 is looking at a picture of a spider. 10 is letting a spider walk on your hand, and so on. You start with 1 and think about spiders. As you think about spiders, you employ your relaxation techniques. When you are able to remain relaxed while thinking about spiders, and then you move on to level 2. You move up the ladder until you can let a spider walk on you happily with no problem. As you can see, the theory is pretty simple. But let's take a closer look at how you might use these principles in your own life to break bad habits, overcome fears and phobias, and tackle triggers from traumatic events in your past. Well, we'll return to Nick, who, having hunkered down at home with depression for months, has developed a mild form of agoraphobia, a fear of crowds, open spaces, and leaving the house. The problem set in gradually. Every time he went out to go shopping or meet friends, he found that he felt depressed and anxious. He hated people seeing how much weight he gained. He hated people's nosy questions about how his job hunt was going, and he hated the noisy crowds that only seemed to drive home his feelings of isolation and annoyance with life in general. And so, without him realizing it, he began to associate the world outside his home with negative feelings, and the world inside as safe, comfortable, and happy. But he needs to break this association. He needs to get outside, exercise, volunteer, connect with friends, and more. But throwing himself into a busy social life all at once will likely only make him feel worse, and then the association will be strengthened. Instead, he uses systematic desensitization to consciously and proactively decide to break this conditioning in himself. Before we go on and see how he does this, bear in mind that this process is never meant to be painful, scary, or unpleasant. Quite the opposite. Rather, we are trying to create a new association, i.e., the trigger equals good feelings. And this means that we cannot embark on the process feeling like we are being forced to do something we don't want to. Rather, remind yourself that you are in control, you go at the pace you want to, and that it's not supposed to hurt. Pick a relaxation technique. The desired goal is to feel completely calm, content, and at ease with the stimulus trigger. It should feel utterly neutral to you. Hence, you need a relaxation technique to create this feeling in yourself. There is no set way to create relaxed feelings, but there are several popular techniques you can choose from, and you can mix and match them or create your own. Here is a simple relaxation technique based on what's called progressive muscle relaxation. Sit or lie down somewhere and begin with a few deep, slow belly breaths. Start at your toes. Flex the toes upward as hard as you can. Hold for a breath and then relax. Flex them hard downward in the same way. Hold, then release. As you release, do it slowly and with control, feeling the tension melt out of the muscles. You may like to repeat this a few times, over your body and onto your calf muscles next. Flex them as tightly as you can, and then slowly relax that tension as you breathe out. Continue moving up your body, tensing and relaxing the muscles of the thighs, glutes, abdominal muscles, chest, shoulders, etc. It may be worth spending more time on the shoulders, jaw, neck, and hands, the places we often hold most tension. When you reach your face, pay individual attention to your lips, brow muscles, and forehead. Now, as though your conscious were an illuminating spotlight, run your awareness over your body and see if you can find any spots of tension. If you do, zoom in there and repeat the tension release, and breathe deeply and slowly and then relax. When you feel that your muscles are nice and relaxed, tell yourself, I am completely calm. These are not just words. Really feel the sensation of calm in your body and what that's like. Become familiar with this state. You will need to find your way back here later. Now, there are many, many variations on these breathing and relaxation techniques. It's not worth getting too hung up on exactly how you reach a state of calm, only that you reach it. Some people like to combine their muscle relaxation and breathing with mental imagery and visualization. For example, if you visualize your anxiety as the literal letters that spell out anxiety, made into a tall and foreboding brick wall, then you might like to imagine that this wall is being gently but steadily worn away by warm rain that makes the letters crumble and disappear. Or take some time to construct your happy place in as much vivid detail as you can. It can be what you want: a remote paradise island with cool blue waters, a peaceful and dimly lit chapel, or a pink cloud floating far above the earth. The more familiar you are with this place, and the more you make the connection that this place means relaxation, peace, and happiness, the easier you will be able to summon up the state of mind that comes with it. Remember that it's not the specific words, imagery, or technique that matters. What matters is that you are finding reliable paths into a calm state of mind. Construct your ladder. You will need to set up a program plan for yourself. Be deliberate. How you do it is up to you, but make sure that you are genuinely challenging yourself, and that each step on the ladder is a fairly consistent increase from the step before it. If the ladder isn't quite right, and that's okay too, though. You can always make adjustments. Next ladder looks like this. Book a concert ticket, mentally rehearse the steps needed to get to the concert, and meet a friend there. Leave the house and walk to the subway station. The above, but also get on the tube and travel to the right stop. The above, but also walk around the busy streets in the city for around 10 minutes. Repeat. But for 30 minutes, stand in a busy crowd. For 10 minutes, stand in a busy crowd. For 30 minutes, stand in a busy crowd. For an hour or more, talk to your friend and tell them about some of the difficulties you're experiencing. You may look at this ladder and think that step 10 doesn't seem so bad. All of that, walking around the city is more stressful than lingering in a crowd. But so long as your ladder makes sense to you, then that's fine. To make your own ladder, you might find it helpful to first start by jotting down a whole bunch of different scenarios that cause you anxiety, and then go through each one and sort them into piles: high, medium, and low. And then take each pile and try to rank them in order. You might need to break a few down into smaller tasks, and then try to assign every task a number on a scale of 1 to 10. If it's more appropriate, you may find a scale of 1 to 100 is better. And Nick starts his process by booking some concert tickets to a show he really wants to see, with a friend he has been neglecting somewhat. The show is in 2 months, giving him time to work through his ladder. On his own terms, he works through the ladder. Buys the tickets, and then pauses and immediately runs through his relaxation technique. He started out feeling a little anxious, but after relaxing, he felt better. He took the time to mark the milestone and praised himself, even if it is only a small step. Next, he runs through the other steps, one after the other. So when he has worked his way up to step 5, he walks around the city. When he feels his anxiety levels rising and his mood dropping, he pauses, finds a quiet corner, and quickly runs through a shortened version of the relaxation technique. At step 7, he flounders a little and finds that he is overwhelmed, and comes home unhappy and defeated. That's okay. He stays at that level for some time. Whenever he encounters fear, sadness, shame, or any other negative emotion, he stops and runs through his relaxation protocol. This is important. He never pushes through. The only condition for his moving up the ladder is that he is completely comfortable with the previous step. Nick looks carefully at the task before him and his rough timeline and commits to taking a small step on the ladder every single day. Because he is deliberately trying to break old associations and create new ones, he takes the time after every session to go through affirmations, to recognize his progress, and to dwell on any good feelings he has managed to create. In 2 months' time, Nick finds the concert a challenge, but he attends and enjoys it. When he comes home, He feels so good and so proud of the progress he's made that he immediately creates a new ladder. Step one of this ladder is go to another concert with my friend. Chapter 8. The Rewind Technique. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, is a complex condition that is best dealt with by professionals, but as dedicated self-therapy practitioners, we can use some of the same techniques to help us better cope with our own traumas, whether we have a diagnosed trauma condition or not. The technique described below has much in common with systematic desensitization. The rewind technique originates from the field of neuro-linguistic programming NLP, and when it was initially developed, it was referred to as the visual kinesthetic dissociation technique. One of the versions of the technique is taught by David Muss. In 1991, he contributed an article on the topic to the British Journal of Clinical Psychology. In this particular study, he used the rewind technique to treat 19 law enforcement officers who were suffering from PTSD. 2 years were spent monitoring the officers' every move. Astonishingly, all of the officers showed improvements in their trauma responses, and most importantly, none of them had a relapse after completing the program. Let's have a look at how we can apply the practice in our own lives. Step 1. Identify a target learning. This refers to the body responses that are caused by the trauma. For example, with the law enforcement officers, frightening altercation with an armed assailant may leave someone with flashbacks to the event, intrusive thoughts, avoidance, insomnia, and nightmares. This is the target learning that can be rebooted and rewritten. Remember, all of these symptoms have a physiological basis. Trauma, like anxiety, begins in the nervous and endocrine system. The goal is then to make sure that these kinds of triggers no longer cause these kinds of physiological reactions. Instead, the technique helps you come up with more appropriate responses that fit the level of threat in the here and now. Step 2. Set up a mismatch experience. Your nervous system responses happen whenever something reminds the brain of the traumatic event. In our example, having someone walk or move behind a law enforcement officer may instantly remind them of that terrifying situation. But as with systematic desensitization, we can create our own situations here in the present and condition a different set of responses. Setting up a mismatch experience will make you feel safe. This is done by reliving the trauma, but in a way that doesn't overwhelm you, and then taking yourself back to a safe place. In our example, the target learning, in other words, the conditioned response or the mental association, is that people moving behind you equals danger. You cannot change the past of what happened then, but what you can do is replay and rehearse a different outcome to the same experience. Creating a mismatch experience is where we create a moment where someone being behind us equals calm and neutral. Every time you rehearse this rewound experience, you are essentially training your neurochemistry, your endocrine system, and your mental associations to play out a scene differently. Step 3. Repeat the mismatch. The mismatch process is as follows. 1. Visualize the safe place before the incident. 2. Watch yourself watching the TV screening of the traumatic event. 3. Embody the movie and rewind quickly to the safe place. Let's take a closer look. Fully relaxing, you take your time in imagining a calm and safe place in your mind's eye. As you do this, you are creating real physiological feelings of calm in your central nervous system. Now, from within your safe space, you then expose yourself to the trauma, but with some psychological distance. As an observer rather than a participant, you watch the event unfold on TV. In your safe space, literally picture a TV screen playing the trauma, and you're holding the remote control. If this still feels a little difficult, You could even watch yourself watching yourself on TV. Imagine that the film on TV begins before anything bad happens. Let's say, in our example, that the police officers are entering a house without any fear or concern. Then the bad event is played through step by step. Then when it's finished, the person imagines pausing the film and floating into the screen where they are now experiencing it in first-person point of view. They imagine that while they are embedded in the film this way, the scenario is rewound so that they experience themselves moving swiftly backward through the event. They experience the event but moving backward. They end up at the beginning of the scene where it was safe and before anything bad happened. For the police officer, this means seeing the assault running backward and seeing the assailant move away from him and run backward out of the house and away. And that's it. We repeat this process each time, landing up in the place of safety, i.e., the moment before the bad thing happened. We remember to play through the story forward while at a comfortable, safe distance, i.e., watching the TV from afar, and play through it backward while you are embedded in the story, watching it through your own eyes. Eventually, the association of the trigger and trauma response begins to fade. You will no longer experience the same emotional reaction when faced with the trigger. Seems like magic, but it isn't. Instead, it simply confirms what scientists now know about how the brain responds to trauma and how that response can be overwritten. Every time you rehearse this situation but reverse it, you are teaching your brain that it has a pleasant outcome, that it results in safety, and that it always ends in a neutral way. And your brain rewrites itself accordingly. If the process is still successful, you will still remember the trauma and be able to look at it and talk about it, but you will no longer have the embodied physiological trauma response that you used to, the one that is so characteristic of PTSD. The rewind technique works because it addresses every human being's need for emotional checks and balances. When our need for safety is not met, mental health problems and especially PTSD can develop. By reviewing and replaying traumatic events, you expose yourself to trauma but in a physically dissociative, i.e., diffused way, and so you eventually fade that emotional component. It may be helpful to seek out a trained therapist to guide you through this process, at least in the beginning. The great thing about this method is that you practice the technique without ever having to reveal names or details of the trauma or having to recount the narrative to a therapist. You can try the technique on any event, long or short term, or practice it with many separate events and triggers, as is usually necessary with PTSD, complex PTSD. The technique can help you stop involuntarily returning to traumatic memories and cut down on intrusive thoughts and flashbacks. It's as though your mind is given the opportunity to put to bed unfinished traumatic experiences, and the trauma response is rewritten and erased. Take a look at the story of Catherine Willenrotter from the website of the Human Givens Institute, which is a group of professional organizations and psychologists who believe that rewind therapy is a way to reboot some of the ingrained genetic givens we all start with in life. Says Catherine, we established that my calm, relaxing, safe place would be a warm beach filled with sunshine and soft rolling waves. As Sue slowly counted to 20 with my exhales, I felt myself slip into a deeply relaxed state where I was fully conscious of everything happening around me. Sue's soothing voice then led me to a television set on the beach with a DVD player holding a DVD of my trauma experience. As soon as she mentioned the contents of the DVD, I was immediately transported back to it. I was there, and I instantly started crying and feeling the same life-threatening distress of the trauma. Had never accessed it so quickly before. She brought me back to my relaxing beach to recover from the shock of feeling my naked emotions hit me so quickly. Few deep breaths later, I was ready to try again. Sue took me through the rewind process. saw myself watching the TV, with the trauma playing forward and backward several times, but not actually seeing the screen, then watched it play forward on the screen and I went backward through it. As the memory was playing faster and faster, all I saw was a blur with particular moments as snapshots within it. Felt the distress on my face lessen and my breath normalize. After seeing it fly by countless times forward and backward from various angles and points of view, I began to disconnect from it. The emotions were neutral, and I saw the trauma as a matter of fact and nothing else. After I had the pleasure of destroying the DVD in any way I wanted, Sue took me through scenarios that had triggered me in the past, describing my calm and confident reactions to them in the future. Sue then took the opportunity to remind me of positive aspects of my personality and my life accomplishments, and reinforce the idea that I have the ability to realize my dreams. In short, it felt like she helped me remove the negative feelings and replace them with positive life-affirming feelings. After she brought me back to the room, I felt relaxed, happy, and emotionally exhausted. Again, it's important to seek out professional help if you're experiencing debilitating symptoms of PTSD or trauma. Though the above process is not difficult by any means, you may benefit far more from receiving tailored advice and support from a therapist who can adjust the technique to suit your unique situation. That said, you don't need to have a full-blown case of PTSD to benefit from the technique's power to essentially rewind situations. We now know how influential certain life events can be on the core beliefs we develop, our self-concept, and the stories we tell ourselves. Clara, Thea, Nick, and Jamie all experienced their own individual patchwork of thoughts, feelings, expectations, biases, blind spots, shadows, secrets, habits, assumptions, hopes, dreams, fears, and difficulties. Most of these came directly from their early childhood experiences or by living through difficult events and relationships. But what if these challenging situations were dealt with as and when they occurred, before they had a chance to embed themselves in the psyche as maladaptive thought patterns? Wouldn't it be nice to proceed through life with a continually updated and renewed psychological clean slate? If it seems appropriate to you, you can try combining the rewind technique with other approaches discussed here. Think of it as a kind of mental hygiene. Every time you experience a shock, a loss, a disappointment, an embarrassment, and so on, you pause and employ the rewind technique to take some of the neurochemical sting out of the experience. The technique fits comfortably alongside positive visualization, calming and breathing techniques, opposite action, self-questioning, cognitive diffusion, and even shadow work and reparenting. There's no reason you can't put memories from your earliest childhood on the TV or watch from the security of your safe place possible future events that you might want to cope forward with when you are your own self-therapist. You are empowered to use whatever techniques help you feel more self-empathy, more presence, and more awareness. With heightened awareness, you can tell when you are having a physiologically anxious fight or flight response and can proactively choose to rewind through it again and again until the stimulus no longer produces that reaction. Your awareness lets you know how well your approach is working and gives you the confidence to adjust as you go, trusting in your own patience and consistency. No two people are the same, and the challenges that each of us face are completely unique. Nobody can say what your journey to mental well-being will look like, but at the same time, no matter who you are, healing, coping, and resilience are all familiar human challenges, and they can all be met best with plenty of compassion, conscious awareness, and the courage to take action to make change.